It's now a little bit after 8. I got 8:01. Tonight is the Planning and Zoning Commission April 28th meeting. We have a general meeting and a public hearing. Tonight we're going to look at 3 existing resolutions we already did and some minutes. Do you want to change the agenda now?
You want to just do the 3 resolutions in the minutes real quick?
Yep, okay, here we go. Okay, we're going to start right in. General meeting item, maybe it's TV 79's got a microphone or no? Okay, let's keep going. General meeting, we're going to deliberate and possible decision on the following items. Number 1 is a coastal site plan review, number 324B, flood damage prevention application, number 373B, Stephen K. Eppley, 47 5 Mile River Road. We don't have to read the rest of it. This is, we have a draft resolution in hand. This is a dock about 5 Mile River Road that we went over last weekend, or last week, sorry. It's pretty straightforward. There were a couple of things that came up in the hearing that were addressed inside here. So if the commissioners don't mind, I was going to go through my edits of the document and then open it up to the field, open it up to the board. What do I want? Under findings, number 8, Jeremy. The same way we did on Salem Straits and the same way we did on 8 Schumacher or Shenmere last week, we just add no members of the public spoke at the hearing?
Sure.
Okay. On number B, under the resolution part, I was going to add number 9 as lot number 9, but then I said no to that. That's the one that's on the other side of the other house.
Yeah, lot 7 is the little sliver.
Yep.
Lot 8 is the property directly to the east of that, which is owned by Mr. Zach as well.
Right.
And
Lot 9 is a sliver, but that's
right.
we don't need to worry about that one. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that one. That is it for me. Does any other commissioners have any questions to this application? Let's go with Larry Warble first. Any edits, Larry?
I don't have any edits or questions.
Jim Rand?
Fred's got to turn his microphone on.
He can do his own microphone.
Jim, you can unmute yourself, but
Jim's
it
good.
looks like thumbs up.
There we go. Okay. No, I have no comments or additions, edits, nothing.
Carrie Gately?
I have no questions or additions. I just want to clarify, or just make sure for the record, when we said slivers that were 7 and 8, or slivers that was 9, can we just, the property that we were concerned about is reflected in the resolution and in the minutes, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That was my only issue.
Great, thank you. George Riley, anything to add?
All good.
Okay.
All good.
I would entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
I have none.
Jennifer
I would
said,
just note that Jennifer Leahy just arrived.
Fantastic. Jennifer, we just started 15 seconds ago.
I was on the phone. So yeah, I'm good.
Okay, would you like to make a motion to approve this resolution as edited?
Yeah, motion to approve as edited.
And Jim Rand seconding?
Yes, I second the motion.
All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand.
1,
Aye.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yep, all done. Next. Thank you, all set. Next item up for bid, coastal site plan review number 346, flood damage prevention application number 400, estate of Yolanda C. Zangrillo, 218 Long Neck Point Road. This is another application, a dock that is actually going to be moved approximately 100 feet closer out to the Long Island Sound. I'm going to go with my changes, additions first, if you guys don't mind. Again, Jeremy,
Yep.
after number 3, no member spoke at the hearing.
Sure.
Okay. And then I think that's it for me. That's it. All set. Let's go at the bottom of the list this time. George Riley, any questions, changes, comments?
Being thorough and complete to me. All good.
Thank you. Carrie Gately,
Nope, nothing. Thank you.
Jim Rand,
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Larry Warble,
No questions or comments.
Jennifer Leahy,
All good.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion to approve from George Riley, I think, Mike's on?
Yes, I did.
Yep. Kara, is that a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
6-0.
6-0. Next. Okay, moving right along. Next, coastal site plan review number 345, land filling and regrading application number 152A is an apple. Matt Rizzo and Melissa Hutson, kind of said it wrong. 3 Salem Straits. This is an application for a spa, a pool, and some decking and some other related site improvements. At our public hearing, the only major comment that I think that came up was the generator or the backup power source for the injector pump that's going to be installed. So I will do mine first, if you guys don't mind. The backup power that we discussed is number 13 in the resolution as a finding. Connection services that the backup power system will be needed to power in case of an outage. So that made it in there. The only thing that I wanted to add was under E as an Edward, Jeremy.
Yep.
It said this is with regards to the as-built survey. It says associated pool kit and along with the injector pump backup system. Do you want to have that on the survey? You want to know where this injector pump is?
Oh, sure. So we'll add that it's the as-built map shall also show the injector pump.
The injector pump may have the backup power source inside it, so it might not be two separate things. But if it's a generator that's offsite, you should mark that too. It's probably going to be on some kind of concrete pad that's existing.
And a generator, if any.
Right, and then the backup power. That's all I had for changes, questions, and comments. Jennifer Leahy, are you going to go first? Jennifer Leahy, go first. Any questions, comments?
Sure. Nope, just the ejector bump. So we're good.
Larry Warble?
No questions or comments?
Jim Rand?
I'm okay, thank you. No questions, comments, nothing.
Kara Gately?
All good.
George Riley?
Nothing.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve this resolution as edited from Kara Gately. Did you say yes?
I did.
Okay, and George Riley seconded.
Yes,
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
6-0.
aye.
6-0. Great. Okay, next item. Do you want to move the thing yet? Or no?
Now we'll just do the minutes first.
You got it. Okay. Now we are up to the minutes. Approval of minutes for April 21st, which was last meeting. I had one item on page 2. At the second paragraph, it says the dock and those 2 lots. If you could change it to 2 tax lots. Second paragraph, last line.
It's showing the relation to those tax lots, yes.
Those 2 tax lots. Add the word tax in there.
Yep.
Okay. And the next I had was on page 4, second paragraph, about 5 lines down. Now this I'm going to need a little bit of help with. He said the closest residence was approximately 450 feet away to the south. I would like to say the closest landward residence.
Okay.
I don't know if the house across the water is closer than 450 feet. But it's still
Say that
land.
again.
In the second paragraph on page 4, Wilder Gleason said the closest residence is subdivision is approximately 450 feet away to the south. He's talking about the Fisk property.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add the word landward residence because I don't know how far away the house is across the street, across the river.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Yeah,
That's a good one.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. The next, on the bottom of that paragraph, Jeremy.
Sure.
The stone pillars directly adjacent to Juniper Road.
Mm-hmm.
They're not directly adjacent to Juniper Road. He was going to move them in at least 40 feet,
Right.
maybe 60 feet.
Yeah,
And stone pillars about 40 feet from Juniper Road.
Okay?
approximately.
He may switch that.
Yep.
The next is at the end of the meeting, top of page 5, allow the applicant to provide additional, we're talking about extending the hearing.
Yep.
The other reason to extend the hearing was the potential relocation and height of the pillars.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You broke up a little bit. There's like technical.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
At the last paragraph, I'm on page 5, top paragraph. The reason to extend the hearing to May 5th was also the potential relocation of the stone pillars and to raise the height of the stone pillars from 4 feet to 6 feet. That was the second reason why we extended it. Okay. Now I'm on page 6. I don't know if we're allowed to change this as part of the resolution. At number 2 on bottom of page 6, which will be reviewed by the Architecture Review Board. Bottom of page 6.
Yes.
They already approved it by the time we saw the application. And I noted that the last time.
Or you could just change will be to was.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
After that stuff, we have a bunch of resolutions that we're really not allowed to change anyway. Those are all of my comments. Roughly so that's-
Page 2, page 5, page 6.
The only thing at the end was
5, 6.
if you go to Eppley 1 in the middle, relative to lot 7 and lot 8,
Yes.
you want to change that to text lot 7 and lot 8?
Let's do that. Okay.
Okay.
Steve, could you say that one more time? That didn't come across.
Okay. I don't know why we have bad hearing tonight. On page 15 of 15, we talked about on 47 5 Mile River Road. We're talking about tax lots 7 and 8 again in that paragraph, not just lot 7 and 8.
Got it.
Okay. That's all my corrections or edits on this. Let's start at the bottom this time. George Riley, any questions, comments, changes? Your mic's on mute, George.
Talking to myself as usual. On page 5, could I just hear how you revised that? It's the 40-foot issue is tied to access to the Darien Land Trust, right?
Correct. The second reason why he extended the hearing was also he had to come back to us with the additional information on the pillars. He wants to go to 4 feet to 6 feet, and he wants to move them like 60 feet in from the road.
Yeah, but that's related to the access to the Darien Land Trust property, right?
No, it's related to his property. The pillars are related to his property.
All right, so is that a third issue then? Because there are, with respect to access to the land trust lands, and a screening for the adjoining properties. So is there a third issue related to the 40-foot issue?
Yeah, it was the height of the pillars.
Okay, all right, I didn't
So
catch
put
that.
that at the
I
end.
thought that was the second issue. All right, I have nothing further.
Can I interject
Sure.
here? As I recall the map, the land trust owns the property to the west, and the land trust has some right of access to the property to the north.
Correct.
Yeah.
What?
If the land trust wants access to the property to the north, they've got it. They can walk right through their property and have access to it. So I'm not sure that a reference to access is the right. Make a question out.
No, what was it? Why the reason allowed us to extend the hearing? The second reason to extend the hearing was they want to redesign the pillars to make them 6 feet high versus 4 feet high. So that's all the paragraph is talking about is the reasons why the hearing got extended.
Okay, all right.
That's all. So I'm just adding that in.
As a third reason.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. George, we got Jim. Kara Gately, any questions, comments, changes?
The minutes, no.
Larry Warble?
No comments.
Jennifer?
No comments.
Okay, entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended from Jennifer.
Motion to approve minutes as amended.
Looking for a second from Larry.
A second
There we
Jennifer's
go.
motion.
All those in favor, say aye.
Raise your hand.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good.
Great, okay.
Steve, before we move on, can you just mention for the record, Mr. Eppley just came in, that his project for 47 5 Mile River Road, the dock was approved, granted with stipulations, and staff will be getting that out to you in tomorrow's mail, Kent, and sending it to Jeff McDougall via
All right.
certified return receipt.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Kent. We'll get that out to you tomorrow.
All right, have a good night.
Thank you.
And then I think that takes care of Jeff McDougal too.
Jeff's already logged off, I think.
Jeff's got it. All right.
Okay, so now
Now,
we're
let me just, Amy's Avatakis, just quick inquiry view. There's a bunch of other people on the screen. Are they all your people?
I have. Sorry, wait, hold on.
she will have Neil,
We have
John.
James, should be James Scatino. I have John Vaccaro. I have Neil Linsky, Peter Romano, and Earl Govin should be on there as well. Yeah.
Okay, are you waiting for anybody else?
No.
Okay, okay, I'm gonna put you on hold for a second again.
So we're gonna make a motion to modify the agenda to move any other business to the end.
Okay, I would like to entertain a motion from, to move the other business to the end of the agenda. Is that so moved by Kara? Is a second from Jim?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All
I
in
second it.
favor, say aye.
You don't need or expect me for that? What's the other business?
No, it would be to, go ahead, Steve.
The other business,
Go.
we
I'm
may,
going,
yeah, we may deliberate the Darien Playhouse, application tonight.
okay.
That.
If you're more than, yeah, you're recused anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I'm out of that. I thought it was something unrelated.
No,
All right, so you're,
absolutely.
okay. Night, George.
George,
Thank you for accommodating me with the schedule tonight.
Sure thing.
so you're, well, just for the record, George, you're recusing yourself from this application?
Oh, yes. For your next application on the Darien Place, I recuse myself.
Thank you, sir.
Night.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
We're good to go.
Okay, it is now
8:20.
8:20, okay? Now we're gonna go to the public hearing section of the agenda. Tonight we have business site plan application number 90-P, Darien Place LLC, 1077 Boston Post Road. It's a proposal to renovate the rear theater portion of the existing Playhouse building by converting the first floor into retail storefronts and converting the second floor to 4 new one-bedroom apartments. Proposal to reconfigure the shared parking lot adjacent to the rear of the building, including adding 7 new parking spaces, relocating the trash enclosure and power transformer, and to perform related site development activities. The subject property is located adjacent to the northwest side of Boston Post Road, approximately 550 feet northeast of its intersection with Leroy Avenue. It's shown on Assessor's Map number 73 as lots 7 and 42, with shared parking lots on number 40 and 41 in the CB and PR zones. This is an application which we had a pre-application for 1077 Boston Post Road on, I think it was February 17th, around there. It was presented by Mr. Vaccaro and a different attorney at the time. Tonight we have the full application being presented by Amy Zapatakis of Rucci and Company. If everybody remembers, the theater basically closed, and it's really closed now. And they want to change the back of the building from a blank wall and a near theater entrance into retail stores with apartments on the second floor where I think the projection room used to be. Jeremy, anything I'm missing?
No, just for the record, we have posted all the application submittals by both the applicant and other interested parties. Those are all on the town website if people want to follow along. www.darien.ct.gov/PZC. And it's all the items are listed under the application for 1077 Boston Post Road. Once Amy and her team present, as Steve noted, there is a peer reviewer who will be commenting afterwards. He has sent in a couple letters, and Amy's team is going to talk about those. Steve, you had one other item?
Yes, before I turn it over to the applicant, I just wanted to make note for the record that, again, this meeting is operating under an executive orders number 7B and 71 issued by the governor in March, saying that we're allowed to have public hearings and zoning meetings virtually, and some of the rules in the state statutes or whatnot have been amended to allow for meetings such as this, and one of them that's important is the posting of the notification of the neighbors.
Right. In this case, we work closely with Amy Zabatakis in pulling together a list of property owners within 100 feet of the subject property, and they were all notified via regular mail. And as I said, everything is on the town website for those who were notified.
Okay?
I'm sorry, for the record, can you, since there was a change in attorneys, when did that notification by mail occur? And was the dates when the mailing occurred or when those people may have received them at offices or locations? Just for the record.
The mailing goes out 2 weeks before our hearing date, which is today.
Is that normally or under the executive orders you cited?
That's normally.
Right. And Amy Zabatakis can.
You cited 2 executive orders.
Right. Amy Zabatakis can talk to when.
And attorneys were shifted. So let's just clear up the record. And if Attorney Zabatakis wants to speak to that, maybe she should.
I'm sorry, I was answering another question, but yes, the neighbor notification originally went out, it went out for this hearing. We did not send, because we knew already that the original date that this hearing was to occur, we knew it was going to get postponed. The neighbor notice went out, I'm sorry, I don't have the date right in front of me, but about 12 days before this hearing.
And where were those 12 days before the hearing to business locations or to emails or whatever?
It was as is per the statute, it went to the addresses on the tax assessor's records.
For the statute or per the order?
Both of that part of the statute was not changed by the executive order. The location of the notices.
Were people at those mailing addresses?
Well, yes, because again, we're not sending notice to the businesses, we're sending notice to the property owners. So the property owners are still getting their mail.
Thank you.
I've gotten a few calls from property owners in response to those letters, so I believe they were all received.
I appreciate you making that very clear for the record. I think it's important to make it clear for the record that even though the governor has issued, exemptive relief and it loosened some things, that property owners were still given proper notice. And so yes. I really appreciate you clarifying that for the record. So thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. So the executive order just loosened that we didn't have to send it proof of mailing, and we didn't have to, and the town didn't have to publish in the paper. But the town
still provided them ample notice.
Yes, correct.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you clarifying that for the record. I think it's important to make that.
Not a problem.
Okay.
And for the record, since I didn't introduce myself, Amy Zabatakis for the applicant.
Good, Amy. Take it away.
So before I start, just because what I'm seeing is a little different than what you are, can you just let me know, can you just see the PowerPoint presentation on your screen, or are you seeing my GoToMeeting information? We're good? Okay. So I represent the property owner, Darien Place LLC, which is owned by John and Joe Vaccaro, who are actually in the conference room with me on the other end of the conference room, who I was talking to before. And I'm joined online by our site engineers, Peter Romano and Earl Govin, the architects, James Latino, and parking consultants. I believe Neil Alinsky from Malone McBroom is on the line. And those folks will all get a chance to speak. I'm just going to sort of summarize the project a little bit, have them introduced, and then, as Jeremy noted, we'll have the town's peer reviewer speak. I usually like to ask for questions from you all as I go along, but because of this setup, I think it'll be easier if we just sort of run through and then have questions at the end if you don't mind holding your questions.
Amy,
Yes.
the only suggestion I had is, and I know you have more than one expert, because there's an architect, there's a site guy, there's a parking guy. I was thinking that maybe we would ask our questions of the individual engineers versus individual experts versus keeping them all at the end. What do you think about that?
I mean, look, I will do whatever the commission thinks is easier. I think because some questions may overlap a little bit, it may be easier for us to just run through the whole presentation first. But if you would prefer to ask questions as we go along, I'll do whatever. We can do it whichever way.
Okay, let's keep it the way you want it now. We'll keep all questions to the end.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
So this application involves the property at 1077 Boston Post Road, which, as we all know, is the old location of the Darien Movie Theater. We're going to be renovating the building, just the back half of the building, not the front, and doing some site improvements. We're going to be creating about 4,350 square feet of retail space on the first floor. The current theater, just by reference, is 5,787 square feet. We're losing some space for hallways, etc. And then there'll be 4 one-bedroom apartments on the second floor. The Darien Place purchased this property in December of 2019. Before that, I think anyone who'd been to the Darien Playhouse knew that movie theater had sort of been struggling. The movie theater actually totally independent of what's going on recently had made the decision to close its doors and officially close its doors and does not plan to reopen as of March. Unfortunately for all of us, I suspect that's going to be the case for many of the movie theaters. I heard recently Bethel has closed its doors permanently as well. The property at 1077 Boston Post Road is party to 2 shared parking agreements with 1127 Boston Post Road, which is the Darien Sports Shop, as well as 1110 Boston Post Road, which is where Webster Bank is located. Those agreements stretch back as far as 1954. Oddly, the building that Kennedy's is in currently does not participate in that parking agreement, even though that building is sort of in the center of that whole area. There are a number of site plans in the town's records, all of which reference this shared parking agreement. Interestingly, they're all under Business Site Plan 90 and then subsequent letters, even though they're for technically different properties. So this is 90P. You'll see in your file a letter of support from Gina Zangrillo on behalf of the Darien Sports Shop. They're obviously one of the other main users of this parking lot. Let's see. Oops, it doesn't work to do it that way. Oh, there we go. So that's the rear of the building. You can see the new brick plaza. Sorry, I'm not sure why the slides are not moving forward very quickly. Let's see if I can do it this way. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is the existing view of the back of the theater, proposed view from the other side. I think personally one of the nice things that's happening is we are getting rid of this brick structure here, which really impedes the walkways around the building. As I mentioned, we have the retail space on the first floor, apartments on the second floor, and you'll have a chance to look at these a little more thoroughly with the architects when they speak. Let's see, who actually, and I would say that the architectural work has been approved by the ARB already. Let's see. Sorry, the way I'm having to do this is a little bit hard for me to see what I'm clicking on. This is the site plan. You can see, as I mentioned, there's sort of this brick patio look in the back, and we've also created a sidewalk connection to the north side of Grove Street to improve the walkability of that whole area. You'll see in your files also a letter of support from Mr. Dulcetti and from Reese Hutchinson. Both of them are excited to see this project sort of start to tie in the whole retail area of Grove Street, which I know has been a topic of conversation when you've been doing the plan of conservation and development. So I think this will be very helpful to that part of town. And as I mentioned previously, we're not going to be making any changes to the front of the building, the facade, that the movie, I don't remember what you call that, but that arcade part of it will stay. Yes, that will stay exactly as is. And the tenants in the front will also stay the same. There's no change to those tenants. So let me turn this over to Mr. Scatino, and then I'll go over the site plan and the parking in a little more detail after he's done. Okay, Jim?
Can you hear me, Amy?
I can.
Okay, good. James Scatino Architects, and I'll just be brief. I think Amy touched on a lot of the points here, but obviously the before-after that we're looking at here, this is a view from the northwest, the rear portion of the building. And I think the main thing is we're adding these storefronts, trying to activate kind of the back half of this building, expanding the sidewalk, make it more pedestrian friendly, new windows on the second floor for the apartments, new exterior trim, new awnings and light fixtures. And then Amy, if you go to the next view, view from the northeast, you can see the entrance to the CST there on the side. Again, the storefronts. Amy mentioned we're getting rid of that trash enclosure, trying to make it continuous walkway around the building. Also, on the second floor, we have a small bump out, about 4 foot by 19 foot. That's for the egress stairway for the apartments. And that's pretty much good for the exterior. And if there's any questions on the exterior or the floor plans, I'm available. My father, Jim Scatino, is also on the line too.
Okay. Thank you. And then also we'll be improving the roof of the building. As you can see, there are sort of this mesh work, and you can see all of the HVAC on the roof. As you can see in the new drawings, that'll be screened and much more attractive from all angles. So now we'll look at the site plan. I think I didn't show you this view yet. So as you can see, we're going to improve the walkability of the area, improve the landscaping, and make a connection to the north side of Grove Street. I think Earl Govan, you're on the line, I think, to speak a little bit to the site plan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I am here, and I can talk to the site plan. So just to orient you, the north is to the right on the sheet. The plan utilizes a couple of different techniques to try to orient the site better to the back of the building. So we've reconfigured the circulation slightly around the back of the building, relocating the refuse area to the northwest, where there's an existing island that's easily accessible by a refuse vehicle. And we've reorganized the parking slightly to get the additional parking spaces while still increasing the brick patio or brick paver area, which is kind of an extension of the facade on the post road to try to draw you to the back of the building. And that continues over towards Grove Street, where we're removing the transformer, relocating that, and screening the existing generator, which is there, and providing a pergola and bench area, kind of a plaza outside the northwest corner of the building, and then connecting that to Grove Street as you go further north. Taking you, so if you were walking down the Post Road, you could walk through the site, then cross over to Grove Street and over to the train station or wherever you're going in that direction. We're adding landscaping within those paved areas. We're adding benches, potted plants. We're adding islands in the parking lot. We're reconfiguring those to get planting and some different trees. The trees that are there now are overgrown and are not great specimens, so we're going to replace those with appropriate trees that will provide shade in the parking lot. But we'll provide also this larger pedestrian area around the new retail that will make that much more inviting and make that circulation much safer than it is currently. And because it's currently now there's no existing plan to show you, but it's the utility area of the building now. So we're trying to create a semi-front door by upgrading the materials, providing pedestrian access, and creating a more safer environment for pedestrian and circulation, vehicular circulation wise. Thank you.
And Earl, maybe you can speak to the lighting as well.
We've added some coach lights throughout the pedestrian area, as well as added some in the parking lot, just in the area that you're seeing in the gray toned area, which is our property. We've upgraded the lighting to try to match what's going on the Post Road and down Grove Street as well. As Amy mentioned, we're relocating the transformer. We're screening the generator with a screen fence. We've provided a pergola area, sitting area. Our planting has been looked at by the ARB and the landscape architect. I think we've got the right plants for that area. We're trying to, again, create a more prestigious entrance, something that's more responsive to the fact that this is a new retail area that hasn't been in the past.
Great, thank you. So the last presenter from our group is going to be Mr. Linsky from Malone McBroom to discuss the parking study that they did, as well as the peer review that you've received from CDM Smith, and there's a couple of back and forths that should be in your record. I think it's worth noting that Malone McBroom has a substantial amount of knowledge regarding the parking patterns in this lot. Many of the parking studies that you will see for the various businesses and site plans in this area were performed by Malone McBroom or predecessors. And so they really know this area. I think at the end of the day, though, both Malone McBroom and the CDM agree that certain times of day, certain times of year, there is going to be really maximum capacity as far as the parkers here. But the good news is that this is part of downtown Darien. There are other public lots in the area. We have an agreement with the Board of Ed that will be entering into a formal agreement, but they have verbally agreed to allow employees to park in the Board of Ed lot when we're at those sort of peak times. And, the idea is to try to make a more vibrant retail community where perhaps people will park in this lot and go both to these new retail establishments across the street to the things that Mr. Genovese is working on, and really allow walkability all through the area and encourage people to park once and then walk around and not park in this lot and then get in their car and drive to CVS, for example. You really want people to stay in one place and walk and enjoy the community. So let me turn this over to Mr. Linsky.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, for the record, this is Neil Linsky from. Thanks, Amy, for going through that. You actually covered a good chunk of the presentation. But just a little bit of background. We completed our initial parking study in February. We received peer review comments in March. we responded to those comments in early April, and just yesterday received a couple sort of follow-up notes from the peer reviewer. But in the big picture, what we're looking at here is around four apartments, around 4,300 square feet of new retail that would we're talking about replacing a former 300 some odd seat pier. So it's a pretty substantial use in the past, although perhaps not recently. But in terms of the new proposed land use change, what we did is we looked at industry data published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers for this amount of new retail in the new apartments. And what we're looking at is a peak of around 14, 15, up to 18 new parked cars during the busiest times of the day, which generally midday, lunchtime. Later on in the evening, overnight, early morning, the amount of parking from this new the new apartments and the retail will be less. So what we did with our typical parking studies, we had counted the lot back in late January. We added the new parking on top. And as Amy mentioned, there is going to be some expected sort of crunch times where the lot might be full. And some parkers, say up to 10 at the busiest times, say on the occasional Friday. Some folks are going to end up using public parking in the area, which is not a bad thing. Amy, can you go to the next slide? Within a block or two, we're talking about the Grove Street lot. There's also some on-street parking. So, yes, some parkers are going to end up utilizing public parking, and the Playhouse lot is full. But arguably, I wouldn't say this is a bad thing. Arguably, this is a good thing, because at the end of the day, this will create more foot traffic from the downtown. Adds to things like vibrancy and all that kind of stuff. So that's the parking in a nutshell. I understand the peer reviewer is going to go through some of his stuff, but maybe that's pretty much it for the overview. Of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Right. I mean, I think before we turn it over to the peer reviewer, the only point that I would add is that we're going from a use of the theater, which had a parking requirement of over 100 spaces, and what we're adding now is closer to the area of about 30. So it's really, while yes, where the study does show, like we said, sometimes of some maximizing of the parking, we're actually reducing the parking requirements for the area with this retail as compared to what was there previously. So that's about all that we have from our team. Steve, I don't know if you'd like to ask some questions of our group now, or if you would like to have your peer reviewer speak first.
Why don't we, hold on. Come on, here we go. Why don't we have the peer reviewer speak first to the parking, and then we can start at the top and go architect, land guy, and go from there. So we'll just hear from our peer reviewer first, which is Sharad
Kaluri of CDM Smith.
Okay, Sharad, you have
guys.
the floor, sir.
Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yep.
All right, great. So this is my first time to Darien in terms of doing a public presentation. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Sharad Kaluri. I'm a senior traffic engineer at CDM Smith. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a licensed professional traffic operations engineer. I've been working with Wilbur Smith and then CDM Smith for about 25 years. So I've done a lot of traffic and parking studies. I do, in fact, do a lot of peer review work for the town of Westport. I'm still their on-call peer reviewer. So I was glad to be on this project. I know Jeremy called me, and we started looking at the parking stuff here. So as Amy and Neil were talking about, I think we've done a few exchanges of documents over the past couple of weeks. I can kind of touch upon some of the highlights, not to kind of go into some of the details. I think most of our comments have been addressed, except a couple of observations more so than actual real issues. I think one of the concerns that we had expressed was the seasonality of this lot. I know there were some comparatives made to the Grove Street lot that the counts were done at the Grove Street lot around spring of 15, and then were compared to the January counts. Because this is such a retail-centric, commercial-centric plaza or use, the concern is that during those peak months, shopping months, there might be some overflow parking that might be needed. And as Malone McBroom has indicated, there are other lots in the area. The concern that we have is sometimes with seasonality, when you have overflow conditions, parkers tend to look for the nearest spot because they've got a lot of shopping to do. And they kind of sometimes double park. They're looking for empty spaces. There's a lot of circulation. I think Grove Street is certainly a public parking use that's pretty close to this parking area. But sometimes just human tendency, do people want to walk that far? Sometimes it's good, but sometimes they want to just wait for an open spot and then kind of park there. So that's the concern. And the other point is, as you look at some of the peak periods, and this was just the month of January, and when you get into some of the other months, maybe you get into a situation where a supply of 187 spaces, you're getting pretty close to it. You're getting close to like 180, 181. Then you start to realize that some of those spaces may not be even be utilized, because if you have handicap spaces, for example, in the lot, and no one's using the handicap spaces, those don't really count towards your supply. So I think the circulation aspect of it and the use of these spaces is going to be one of those things that we're concerned about. So those were kind of two of our big concerns. Knowing that the Board of Education has somewhat agreed to allow for some employees to park there, it's probably a good thing, because especially during the December months where, or some of the peak months where you have or need for parking in this lot, you could use that to support that. But certainly, I think it's still, in those peak periods that was analyzed, the Thursdays and the Fridays, especially during lunchtime, were kind of pretty close to the supply. So those are the two comments, I think, with seasonality and the supply piece of it.
Okay, thank you.
I can take any questions if you guys have. Other than that, I think most of our other comments were resolved.
Let me ask you a couple questions. This is Steve Albani, I'm the chairman of the commission.
Hi.
Hi there. In your March 23rd letter, you detailed 5 questions at the end. Malona McBroom answered your 5 questions on April 7th, and then you answered again on April 27th, which was yesterday. Yeah.
Correct.
With regards to your question number 1, consider the seasonal factors of that. You consider that still open?
I think the issue, it is still kind of open. I think we kind of, the reason is, and I can kind of explain that a little bit more.
Can I interrupt 1 second?
Go ahead.
Have you 2 engineers have had live conversations with regards to this, or is it just all letters back and forth?
Mostly letters back and forth. We haven't spoken to each other.
Okay. You're allowed to talk. Smart minds think alike, but go ahead.
I know Neil pretty well. I work with, Neil and I know from the peers, but we didn't really talk to each other since.
Okay.
We've been kind of exchanging.
That's cool. Because in your letter, I think you had question 2 is still open, question 3 is still open. You closed question 4, but it's still kind of sort of open by me, and I'll touch on that when the time comes. But
okay.
If you could just talk, I want to make sure that that you guys are in agreement eventually, if you to the extent you can be.
Sure.
So talk to me about questions 2 and questions 3 of your letter, and why they're still open.
So question 2 is, I think the whole issue about the seasonal factor counts in January, and fact that this lot could have some peak variation during those peak holiday months and the use of this lot. So we haven't seen any data in other months. The January month, this seems to be the month that most of the data collection was done. So seasonality does play some element into how the parking activity occurs. And we kind of, in the previous letter dated March 23rd, we had looked at some seasonal factors. And I think Malone and McGroom did make some adjustments to their counts. They applied a 13% increase on the parking numbers that they calculated in January to account for that seasonal effect, which is kind of what we refer to a national guide, a standard book that shows how seasonal variation impacts some of the retails, uses and things. So that did bring the numbers up, and in fact, those numbers were pretty close to what the supply is. I mean, they have 187 space supply in the lot, which I think in the case of Friday they go over, the supply goes over, or the demand goes over the supply, and I believe it's Thursday and Saturday they are just about 187. So it's kind of pretty close to the number that the supply is. So again, it's as they state, there's still 3 or 4 spaces that people can park on. The concern is what happens if people can't find those spaces when they're being used by others, and because it's like a handicap space or others, and what does that do to the whole supply? They obviously can circulate into Grove Street lot and park there, but certainly that. Sorry, Day.
Keep going. No, you're fine. It's at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I'm trying to see if what your final conclusion is.
I mean, I think the conclusion here is the seasonality is the concern, and I think again, we haven't seen data about how the counts happen in December versus January, so I don't think it's a bad situation here, but it is getting very close to capacity. Is what we want to point out. It's an observation that we're making, that your parking lot is near capacity.
Okay, so that's question. That's question 3. What about the next one after that?
So the next one is regarding the same. It kind of evolves into the supply demand factor. So when we look at parking supply, we don't go and maximize. If you have 180 spaces, doesn't mean that's all used. When you design parking lots, we design for about 80, like even IT and other methodologies, we look at 80 to 90% of the parking spaces are typically what we design for. So when you get close to that number, which in the case of here, we get close to that number, it's not a problem, but certainly a parking lot is considered to be near capacity. So when you look at the supply of 187 spaces, in our analysis, and if you look at the March 23rd letter, we were not sure about the total number of spaces. We came with 184, including the 4 spaces that are being proposed as part of this. So when we apply a factor to that supply, there are several times of the day that you are at or over that in terms of the number of people parking on those spaces. So again, it's one of those things where we can probably say that people will go to the Grove Street lot, or they will keep circulating around other lots. So, but it still gets close to the capacity number here.
Okay.
Is what we want.
Okay. But I'm going to ask the guy from Malone Room, Neil, to comment 1 second. But my only thing is, I've been in real estate for a while. You don't build parking for Black Friday. So that's you don't build. You're always going to have. It's always going to be full. But Neil, you want to comment on that? You were the one that wrote the last letter. No, you wrote the second to last letter. Is that right? Yeah. Do you want to make any comments with regards to the back and forth on that, please?
Sure. My apologies if you can't hear me that well. I'm in my child's basement and the dehumidifier just kicked on my young son's playroom basement. But anyways, we had, as Sherrod had mentioned, we had initially counted in January, but in our response to his first comments, we had adjusted our counts of the Playhouse lot we increased them to account for a more sort of yearly average amount of parking. That is sort of would be our baseline within the Playhouse law. So that bumped those numbers up. And then we added our new parking from the the 4 apartments in the 4,300 square feet of retail on top. So yes, we did in our response and our final response, we had taken into account sort of average, reflective of average parking in the Playhouse law, average yearly parking, if you will. Sherrod brought up what many people call the 80 to 90% factor, which is a parking lot or any parking facility. Once you get above 90% full, it just makes it harder for people to find the remaining spaces, which is true. But that doesn't change the fact that there are still going to be some remaining spaces. So once you get closer to the lot being full, once it's closer to 95 or 100% full at a handful of peak times, people will circulate a little bit around the lot. They might even wait a few moments if they see someone walking to their car and getting ready to leave. That is sort of what it is. It's one of those things that you see in a typical kind of downtown setting. But because we're in downtown Darien, and we have public parking nearby, it's not a huge concern because we have sort of overflow public parking available. The 80 to 90% factor is more of an issue to consider. Say you're out in a suburban site that doesn't have any secondary options for parking. But we're in downtown Darien, and there's public parking that is available nearby. So I hope I touched or answered the questions.
Right, I think you did. I think you tried to. I want to make one last comment, and then open and let Kara Gailey ask a question. The one thing I think the overall arching thing we're trying to do as a planning and zoning commission is make downtown walkable, where you do park your car someplace and you walk to multiple locations. If you go to the mall and you park on the side where Macy's is, you might land up on the other end of the mall where JCPenney's is. In the sense of this, you might start at the butcher, which is all the way to the at one end of this Grove Street, and land up at the sports shop on the other end of Grove Street. So, our goal is to make it walkable. But I think Kara Gately may have some comments relative to this before we move on. Kara?
I have comments, but honestly, I think I'd like to start with, and I'm not criticizing anybody in any way, shape, or form, because it's a very new format, and it's very challenging for everybody, and we're in challenging times right now. I think having all the presenters at once, I've been literally writing and scribbling questions and comments for at least a half hour now. So my questions for the original guy are now lost and moot because now we're on another guy. And I'm not even sure who's speaking now. And so I think, honestly, next time, I think we should allow for questioning as each expert speaks, because the questions I think each of the board and commission members have for each expert, it's fair to ask that expert at that time.
Yeah, we will. I get it. We will. I'm going to start at the top from that. But
I agree.
So many comments, but who am I addressing them to, and who am I speaking to? I don't know.
Okay, well,
Kara, if I can say, I'm just trying to be a gatekeeper here, because I think this is a difficult.
Who's the gatekeeper?
Yes, Steve is.
I want to have her start with questions for the architect.
yeah. I want to go back to the beginning.
Right, you're an advocate for your client, and Steve is the chairman.
No.
Right?
what,
That-
what,
that-
You
that
mean
was-
my
no,
I'm trying to make it as easy as possible to get you guys the information that you need. So any questions that we can answer, we'd be happy to.
no,
I have no idea at this point who is speaking, and I have so many questions, and I think the other commissioners do as well.
all right, do you want to, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Do you want to talk about the parking now, or you want to hold that until, for a minute?
I think we should talk about parking.
Parking, definitely.
Okay, all right. I want to make my comments relative to parking, and then we'll open up to the field. Just for the record, Neil from Malone McBroom was the first person to speak to. He represents the applicant. Okay? The second gentleman from Sharat Kalori from
At the grocery store?
No. Grove Street.
No, someone was speaking about a grocery store that people would want to be walking
Sharat.
to.
We'll get to that. Hold on one second. And then Sharat was hired by the town from CDM Smith to review Neil's report. In our file, we got 3 letters that went back and forth between the two. And then the fourth one was posted on the webpage, and I have it in my hand. So let's start at the top. Jennifer Leahy, do you have any
Yes.
questions for these two experts on the parking issue?
So Sharat, I have questions for you. So I'm sorry, because I think I also I'm not sure if I'm getting anyone confused. So what grocery store were you talking about, Sharat? Because I was confused by the grocery store.
Oh, did I say grocery store? Sorry, I might have said Grove Street lot.
Okay. I think because the audio is so bad. Okay.
Maybe
that's
the audio might be, yeah.
Okay, so that was the same as Steve was saying about the other person was at Grove Street. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Grove Street.
And now what factor are you discussing? 80 to 90%? Is that what you're discussing when you say close to capacity?
Yeah, so typically when designing parking lots, in terms of knowing how much supply in the parking lots there's a factor that practitioners use in terms of designing a lot. So the lot is never designed for 100% supply. So you design for 80 to 90% kind of rule of thumb. Some people are more conservative, they use 80%. Some people go all the way up to 90%. And the reason behind that is as the lot gets closer to the 100%, you start to see some different behaviors or tendencies of parkers because they find the lot is pretty much full. They start to circulate the lot much more. They either wait for someone to move their car, and it creates a little bit of a friction, if that's the right word, within the lot. So the 90% is kind of a number 80 to 90% is the range that is used for the lot. So where I was using that was the number of spaces that are in this lot, the 187 spaces that are the proposed spaces. We don't consider all of those spaces as available supply. Because what happens is when you get close to the 187 number, it starts to experience that capacity, and it starts to experience that fullness of the lot.
And how often are you predicting that this would happen? I'm just trying to understand when you say seasonality.
So the seasonality is essentially based on the months of the year, and the 80 to 90% factor or the number that we're talking about is if you look at the more recent letter from Malone McBroom and you look at the table that they created for Thursday, Friday, Saturday between 12 to 2 and noon to 2 and 2 to 4, you can see that the future parking demand is 181, 197, and 183. So, those numbers either are above or pretty close to 187, which is the supply. So 181 happens to be about 92%, 90%, something like that. 183 happens to be like 94%, 95%. So you're getting pretty close to the supply that's there.
So in your expert opinion, this is not just for like holiday shopping time. This is on a fairly regular basis.
This is an average condition. So that's, as Neil was talking about, the 13% we talk about. And that's, again, I should premise everything by due to lack of knowing what the seasonality of this specific lot is, we have to rely on data that's available on a national level.
Of course, we appreciate that.
And if you look at our March 23rd report, we had put in a table that shows how the different months are, in terms of table 1 shows how the different months are in terms of retail use. You know, in January is like 56%. In December, you're at 100% of the total use of the lot. You find a lot of more activity in December versus January. So the month of the 13% we came up with is essentially based on an average month like a June or July. If you take November, December out of the mix, because those are those high months, if I may call, and you take the rest of the months and you take an average, you come to about 13% higher in other months than January is. So all that was done in their table was they expanded everything by 13%. And that's where you get close to that number of 187. So this is not even looking at a December month or a November month.
Okay. Well, okay.
Okay.
So it's basically, again, due to, we don't have a lot of yearly counts of these lots in the area. So, I mean, obviously, there was some study done in 2015 by Nelson Nygaard looking at parking in the downtown. Not knowing exactly the seasonal variation of this lot, it's very hard for us to kind of compare this to the national, but we kind of had to do this because we didn't have any other source for us to look at these lots.
Okay, and then Jeremy, but that would be the same sources that other peer reviewers that the town hires would also be using, correct?
Yes, this is the ITE, or the Urban Land Institute. This is Table 1 in Sherratt's March 23rd memo. The source of the data is the Urban Land Institute.
Where Clark usually uses ITE.
So they're basically the two documents. ITE is the parking generation document. It also has numbers for seasonal variation. Shared parking is a separate document by Urban Land Institute, which talks about seasonality of shared uses, where seasonal conditions make a lot of difference in terms of if you have a retail use versus an office use. So it kind of takes into that into account when you calculate shared parking need. It takes that into account.
Okay. Neil, can you just comment and see if you can answer the question too? In your letter, can you look at your April 7th letter on page 2, where it talks about you need, the future demands 197 spaces, and you only have 187 spaces. Like, how many days of the year are we talking about?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
I'm talking to Neil. On your letter that's dated April 7th, okay, it's page 2, table 1. You say the future demands 197 spaces, and the supply is only 187 spaces. You start at the bottom. My question is, the supply demand thing, how many days a year are we talking about? Is it 2 days a year? Is it, every weekend? Because your parking counts and the other parking counts don't dictate that at all.
This takes into account sort of your yearly average. So, in sort of generally to answer your question, this could happen on half of the Fridays during the year, during the midday sort of noon to 2 or 3 period, where the Playhouse lot could very well be full, and you might have 10 parkers seeking to park in the public parking supply in the surrounding couple blocks.
Yeah, so I'm just to refer back. So future parking demand Thursday noon to 2, 181. Friday noon to 2, 197. There's only 187 available. Saturday 2 to 4, 183. This is not like December 15th. On page, what are we on? Page 2 of the April 7th letter.
some of the weekdays on the Saturdays, the lot, based on this analysis that we've done, the lot could get close to full.
I'm sorry, if new speaker is
Back.
house, please, for the record.
It's Neil.
I know. They switched speakers, so like I think every new speaker has to announce for the record who's speaking.
Sure.
Like,
Okay, again, this is, Neil Olinsky from My Loan Room, on behalf of the applicant.
thank you.
So just to add a little bit, yes, I mean, this lot, during some of the peak periods, midday, particularly on Fridays, it's going to get close to full and full sometimes, and some people will not be able to fit in there. They'll have to park some of the public parks supplied. But to bring it back to the bigger picture, we're in downtown Darien. Everybody's familiar with it. And the fact that we have public parking supply on street, not only Grove Street lot, but other lots, that can accommodate some of the quote-unquote overflow parking demands.
I'm sorry, where's the on-street parking?
So I don't know if our slide is still up, but if you can see the slide, I think Amy's. Sorry?
You just said there's on-street parking, so where is that?
Yes. So if Amy's slide is still up, there are little yellow rectangles sort of highlighting where there is on-street parking nearby. There's on-street parking. There's a little bit on Grove Street. We've got some on Route 1, not to mention the
How many
side street.
spots would those fit?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
How many spots are those little yellow triangles you're pointing at, or rectangles,
Mhm.
of on-street parking on Post Road?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me.
You referenced them
But-
in your testimony.
Mhm. We
Can you
can
guys
find that out.
those numbers, please? And do other retailers use those spots or rely on them?
Of course, it's a downtown, and
Thank you.
anybody who, it's first come, first served. Anybody who finds those spaces will get them. There's some time limits on them.
You're saying that your applicant can rely on those in peak times at the detriment of
like-
others.
I wouldn't say it's a detriment to others. It's a first come, first served basis like any other lane use in the downtown. You know, and I'd also reference back, I think it was a Nelson Nygaard downtown parking study that was done 2016, where I think they looked at all the on-street parking, and it was
Was that
maybe
submitted to the record?
70% for that peak.
I'm sorry, did you submit that to the record?
We do.
No one has.
If not, can you please? Because I would be interested in reading that.
We can put it in.
Thank
It's
you.
a town document. Town owns that document. We commissioned it.
So I'm sorry, just to go on to this. So I guess now that I'm looking, so I get so December monthly adjustment factor. So help me out, and I'm sorry, but so if we're at 197 on a normal Friday noon to 2, or is the 197 an average of all the months? Is that what you were saying, Sharat?
So this is Sharat Gallery from CDM Smith. The 197 represents what I would say, like Neil was talking about, at least half the Fridays in the year.
Okay,
So it's an average month. So you can almost say, like, if you have 52 Fridays, I would say at least 26 of them.
Okay, fantastic. So that's great. So let's say 50, let's say half of them, right? So, and if we're looking at your monthly adjustment factor, so we've got January's low, and then we start ticking. June seems pretty solid, maybe before school or ending of school for camp. August, we've got that 69%. So November and December. So talk me through, what does 197 look through in when you're at 69 or when you're at 72 and then at 100? I don't understand what that means.
Let me interrupt 1 second. The 197 is a number that came from Neil's report, not Sharat's report.
Right, but Sharat has looked at both of them, correct, Sharat?
Right.
We've been talking.
So
yes.
let me explain.
So Sharat is an expert on that.
So let me talk about how the 197 came. So the 16, if you look at table 1 of Malone McBroom's report, the 162 is what they're estimating to be the occupancy based on the January month of that lot at between 1 and 2. And then the 13% increase, which to Jennifer's question, the 13% increase comes from taking an average of all the months except November and December, because those are the anomalies. So so if you take 13% on the 162, you get to 183. So to answer your question, the December factor would be much higher, and the November factor would be much higher, 13%.
Okay,
So
and
that
so
pulled that 183
right.
even higher up over more than 197.
okay, so
based on that data.
Okay, so and if so, our spread on that is 13 is more. So we're looking at maybe, what would that be then? 14. So that could be another 30 spots, 10 spaces is there. Would it be in December?
So if I can do my math quickly, I mean the jump from January to December is quite high. It's almost double,
right,
to 600. So that is, the other one is going to be 72 divided by 56, if I do it quickly. So that's going to be a 30% increase versus a 13% increase.
So, okay, so 30% increase, so 260 is, so we're looking at like a 250 on a future parking demand in December for, let's say November, December-ish from... Yeah. So basically, all of these numbers are over the 187. Any way you slice it, basically November, December, and even in some of those months, because we've took an average, because you have like in August, it has high. Okay.
And if you look at that, our concern is that January happens to be the lowest of all.
Right. Okay, so now I understand. So we're basically over capacity for pretty much. Well, yeah. Okay. So many months in this
on that peak period, on that 12 to 2 period. Now, in some of the other time periods, you may not be as full, like Fridays, between noon and 2, but you'll be getting pretty close to it.
Right. So, and you could be right. So, okay. So if you're 60 spaces more. So how many? I'm sorry, how many other spaces are there in the public lot total? Like how many public spaces are there?
Maybe Neil can answer that.
Yeah, the document here says 150 spaces.
So 150 spaces total in the public,
down parking study.
And so this, okay.
Vacant during midday peak on a weekday.
So 150 spaces are vacant?
Mm-hmm.
And this is, there's 150 spaces?
Vacant, they're available. They're not vacant. They're available.
Okay.
Vacant or available? Those are two. Available? Is that what you mean?
I'm just reading what the report says. It says vacant.
It's one and the same. The spaces are empty. There's nobody parking them. That's what we mean.
On the street in front of Reeves, there's no extra parking there?
I'm sorry, the audio is not great.
Are you saying that none of these yellow squared spots, no one is ever parking, they're always vacant?
No, what we're saying is that there's around 150 empty parking spaces in the downtown public parking spaces during the peak midday.
Oh, downtown.
In all of downtown. So so what we're talking about.
So if that's the case, then why do other parking spots and other tenants have to hire private security to man their spots?
If I can speak to that, Kara, because in fact the Vacaros had to hire private parking people when they first bought the property, and that's because people that shouldn't be parking in the various lots have been. So they were throwing out. Wait, let me finish, please. I will let you speak. They had to get rid of commuters they had to get rid of employees of other businesses that were parking in the retail parking spots. So people are hiring private parking guards so that the proper people are using their lots. This lot should be used for retail.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Totally, Amy, I can't agree with you more. My issue is if we're calling spots vacant, I have an issue with the word vacant. Because if other landowners have to hire, like you know for yourself firsthand, security to manage, right? People parking who shouldn't be there. How are there 150 vacant spots?
If I may, the 150 refers to public parking, which is town-owned parking. I don't think.
So it's not
I think that
vacant
term-
parking, which
This is Larry. Since I introduced that term, it came from the
It came from the
2015 downtown parking study that I think Steve said is a Darien.
correct. That's the we're getting into the weeds, which is great. The issue is the 2015 parking demand that the town had from Nelson Nygaard says that the town's got 650 parking spaces in the downtown area, which is quoted in the Malone McBroom letter of April 7th on page 3. If the word vacant, it's not the applicant's parking study expert, and it's not the town's current parking study expert. That's a report that was quoted from, that was done at the request of the town in 2015. Okay.
Quoted by who?
It was the town hired Nelson Nygaard in 2015 to do a parking study downtown.
I get that, but why is it not heard?
And so now Malone and McBroom quoted that. That's where it came from. But what I would see you do back 1 second is Neil from Malone and McBroom. Your chart, table 1 in your your April 7th letter. Your parking count, and this one time we're talking about, was 162 cars on a Friday in January. Okay, that's it. That's from your letter on December 15th, and there were 28 vacant spaces in that lot. We increased that at the request of the town's reviewer, Sherrod, from CDM by 13%. Get you to 183. Okay? Then in your letter for future demand, it goes from 183 to 197. I don't understand if you take 162, you increase it by 13%, which is what Sherrod suggested. Then how does it go from 183 to 197? So can you explain that to us?
So you summarized it pretty well. We counted in January, this past January to Friday, 162 cars were parked in the Playhouse lot.
And there was 28 vacant, there was 28 empty spaces.
Right, and we increased that to represent a more average condition, bumped that number up to 183, and that is our average sort of baseline. Then we added our additional 14 new parked cars, which I'd like to bring it back to the bigger picture. We're talking about 15 plus or minus new parked cars from this proposed land use change. Added those on top, that's where you get to 197. Compare that to the number of spaces in the lot, you're going to have approximately 10 folks who are not going to fit, and they're going to search for nearby public parking as a sort of plan B to park downtown.
Okay, where did the
we encountered the Grove Street lot back in January as well, and there were on the order of 30 empty spaces during that same time on a Friday. So recent counts of the Grove Street parking lot, just as a sample, that does show some available parking. There.
Okay. Jim Rand, let's hear from you. We have not heard from you yet on this document, on this issue.
Let me say in preface, I don't have a strong feeling about this. The people, if this lot is not large enough to meet the demand, the people that are getting screwed are the people that occupy the three businesses that share the lot. And to me, the concept of a shared lot is you've got a number of businesses, in this case three, as I recall, the sports shop, the playhouse, and the bank, that have agreed amongst themselves that, okay, the sports shop needs X, the playhouse needs Y, and the bank needs Z, and they all agree that they're going to share this lot. Now, if somebody comes along and proposes to change the business of one of the parties to the shared agreement to the point where they're demanding a greater share of the shared parking that is implicit in the original agreement, then the people that should have a problem with that in the first instance are the other parties to the shared parking agreement. I mean, is that a reasonable assumption? I don't know who I'm asking.
I'd answer that question. The answer is yes. Gina Zangrillo and Fred Conzi sent in their proxy that they're in favor of the application, and they're the second largest user of the user/owner of this lot we're talking about.
All right. I mean,
They're the largest user. We own the most of the lot.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree with that. You may own the most of the acreage. They probably the biggest demander of spaces.
if the parties have agreed, I mean, taking my laissez-faire view, what the hell do we care? That's the first thing.
Jim, I can't.
Just let me finish, Kara, please.
Sure, I'm out.
The question I have is, I mean, and there's a lot of numbers being batted around, 180, 190, whatever it is. Does the proposed development that the applicant is requesting approval of, does that in and of itself increase demand on the shared lot?
The demand caused by these new retail establishments and the residential apartments is far less than the movie theater demand that was there before. The movie theater demand was about 100 spots.
Then why are we even arguing about this?
I'm confused now. What was the?
I don't necessarily think we're arguing about it. We're just I'm trying to see if the experts are on the same page, right? That's
there's a shared parking lot and there's a shared parking agreement. And if this, I'll call it a development, does not in and of itself represent an incremental increase in the demand for parking over and above what there is today, then
It does.
I thought I heard that it does.
That's what Neil has to say. Neil, in your letters and documents, Neil, you created these additional demand for 14 spaces. That's what I don't understand where that came from.
He's comparing. Sorry,
ahead, Amy.
Neil, I'll let you speak, but let me just, because I was a little confused by this as well, so I've discussed it with him. He's comparing to existing conditions and parking count numbers, and that at the time of day that they were doing their parking counts, we're assuming that there weren't people there parking for the movie theater. But I guess to answer, there's two ways to look at the question, right? You can look at the actual people that are parked there and make, try to figure out where the numbers are going to go, which is what both of the parking experts have done. But we can also talk about actual parking demand using the Darien regulations and the numbers that are required. And I can say from that the theater required 100 spaces. This use is about 30, 35. So there's, again, I think that the parking demand that we're expecting, and as Commissioner Rand pointed out, the real issue here is for the businesses, the retail businesses in downtown, and making sure that they have a vibrant shopping community and making sure that they are satisfied with the parking that is available. If there's not parking available, you're not going to get tenants. So all these commercial landowners want there to be parking available for their businesses. I'm sorry, so I sort of spoke over Neil. Neil, did you have anything that you would like to add to that?
The only thing I'd add is that, Amy, you mentioned the town parking regulation requirements. We also looked at more sort of national industry data, which is where our number of 14 or 15 approximately new parked cars, that's where the estimate had come from, sort of more national data, which is actually, I would say, updated more often, and it's lower than the town's parking regulations. But yes, we boil it down, we're looking at approximately 15 new parked cars that would be generated by the 4 apartments and approximately 4,300 square feet of retail that is being proposed.
Okay, well, that goes to if I can go back to Amy, I think that goes to my point. We've looked at this shared parking lot in the past.
Correct.
I have not, but
the town,
the commission has.
We did when Interlight came in. We looked at last when Interlight came in.
Sorry?
We last looked at this when Interlight came in to the Webster Bank building.
Okay, I don't. But my point is that at some point, the commission took the Darien rules and so many spaces per square foot for retail and so many spaces for residential and then some number for the theater. Mm-hmm. And effectively blessed that. Now, there's been no changes here except that the Playhouse goes away. So you subtract the Playhouse number and you add the 14 or 15 spaces that we're talking about. And if we're still under the number of allowable parked cars that the commission has previously approved, then I don't think I don't think we need to be concerned about it.
and we are adding 4 additional spaces in the lot as well with this project.
Okay,
Yeah,
Jim,
I don't, sorry, Steve, I'm just going to jump in. Jim, if that is what I am reading here, I would agree with you. But when you're looking at the future parking demand, it is not within what it far exceeds anything that's ever been discussed. So this is what I keep looking back at. I mean, if Sherrod's numbers at 30% just for December and January brings the future parking demand in those months up to 256 on a Friday. And talking about a shared agreement, I don't know. So I'm confused. I mean, I'm looking at these total parking requirements and all these numbers, and I'm not really seeing where we're under. I don't see how this math is working. I mean, and Sherrod has clearly said that we're at 90% capacity often throughout the year at lunchtime. So I'm not a peer reviewer that the town's hired, but he is, and he's clearly telling us, which I've written now notes and taken his notes and his math. I don't understand. He's he's a third party, right? So he keeps telling us that we're at capacity. I don't know, or beyond.
This is Amy Sabatakis again. I think what we have to bring it back to, which is what Jim was saying, which is is the problem, where is the problem coming from? There have been, as stated, there have been agreements and approvals issued. This particular use is 3 small retail tenants and 4 small residential apartments.
So again, so you have 3 small retail and 4 tenants, correct? 4 units. So 4 units could be 8 people, right? We could all do the math, but I'm just saying, again, this is just numbers that I'm looking at. I don't know why.
Yeah, the 4 residential units we didn't really spend much time on are small 1-bedrooms. These are not. They're most likely to be single people living in these.
Okay, I appreciate what you're saying, but as a real estate agent in this era of COVID, I have lots of people moving out from 500 square feet, 600 square feet in the city with 3 people, like 2 adults and a baby. So I appreciate that. And maybe before COVID, I wouldn't feel this way, but I have a lot of people coming out who think a 1,500 square foot house is huge. So the definition of small, I think, has changed. And I'm sorry. I appreciate that, but I just don't think that's where we are anymore.
Well, then I guess, but that's the difficulty is we've got a plan of conservation and development that's encouraging commercial landowners to put residential on the second floor. This is a reuse of a space that had a requirement of 100 parking spaces. And we've got, I don't see how this addition is, I'm looking at the same numbers as you are, and I'm a resident of Darien, and I park downtown in Darien during Christmas time, and yeah, it's tight. The parking study that was done by Malone and Broom was done before the Vacaros had a chance to start monitoring the parking. I would highly suspect that during those holiday years, they're probably going to have some sort of parking person out there, both to regulate who's parking there and to direct people to other parking downtown. But I think that big picture, this complies with what the commission has asked of commercial landlords, which is to provide residential on the second floor, to provide retail, and to create a walking environment that encourages shoppers to park and shop around and walk around downtown Darien. And that's what we're doing.
Okay.
If I can just
Jim,
say one more thing, I'll keep my mouth shut.
No, don't ever keep your mouth shut, but I want to make sure Larry Warble gets in here too. Go ahead.
Jennifer, I guess my point is there may be a parking problem downtown, and there is a parking problem downtown at certain times of the week or the year. And this lot may be too small to accommodate all that, but it is not, that fact has nothing to do with the proposed application.
Okay.
I don't even know why we're talking about it.
Okay.
I'll shut up.
That's okay. No, you're fine.
It's still our job. I understand what you're saying, but so you're saying we have a parking problem, but because this, I don't agree, Jim. Our job is also to make sure that downtown we've maintained, right? If we're at parking capacity, or I don't agree. I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree, and I also don't think the numbers are totally what they are.
Larry Warble, would you like to speak to this parking?
And I apologize because some of this is going to take us back in time like 60 minutes.
It's all right.
Just because of the nature of some of the notes I took earlier on. But a lot of just looking at some of the things. So I have just and I apologize for not knowing this. Who actually owns this lot? Is this owned by the 3 properties that have the agreement? Does the town own it, and there's some sort of a agreement? Like, who actually owns the lot? I guess
The lot is privately owned, and it's owned by the 3 properties that I listed at the beginning, which is the Webster Bank Building, the sports shop, and the Playhouse. And I would, and on some of the documents that are in your files, you can see the property lines. As I stated earlier in response to a question from Steve, the Playhouse building does own the majority of the parking lot.
Okay. And so there's just been a kind of a mutual coexistence here. Because I think early on, one of my thoughts were as you're planning some what I consider to be very nice improvements to the walking facility. I was just wondering if there was a greater opportunity here, or if anyone took the time to just look at the configuration of the entire lot, and if there's more. I mean, is this the most efficient way to have the lot designed, or because 3 people own it, there's really no opportunity to do that? But it just seemed like maybe this is an opportunity to say, hey, is there a way to? Because when I drive into this lot, it's sort of. I mean, I feel like I'm in a zoo, a maze, you know.
There was a major redesign done in connection with one of the Darien Sports Shops applications. I'm going to say in the 70s or 80s. That was the last time. But look, you know, the Vaccaros, as I stated at the beginning, purchased this property in December of 2019. So they're not the long-term people that have been here.
Right.
I can. They're sitting here so I can have them speak for themselves, but they will be working with the other commercial landowners and the other owners of this parking lot to see, you know, what can be done on a going forward basis. But right now we're looking to make sure that vacant space that can't be used for anything right now can be used for something.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let me ask, see if, Larry, can I have John add on to that or
absolutely, yeah.
Hi. John Vaccaro, owner of the property. So, look, I live in town and have for 35 plus years and done some other developments in town. What we have is, as we all know, is a theater that's obsolete, failed, whatever. So it's about a third of the building. You kind of look at just the volume of it, right? Well, to leave it vacant, is that the alternative? Okay. This isn't the straw that broke the camel's back. We're talking to 3 tenants. We have 2 leases out for signature on the first floor, but we have permission to disclose who they are. They have not signed the lease yet. So we can take the mystery out of who the occupiers are going to be. So it's 1,000 square feet, which is very small, to a lighting manufacturer's rep that would have a showroom. You know, since class closed, they have another location, and they would like to have something in Darien. And it'll be fairly low volume, almost by appointment only, and it's all custom-made lighting fixtures and whatnot, okay? We have a barber shop that's in town, wants to downsize their space, we can't afford to have a 2,500 square foot space, so they're gonna go into 1,200, 1,250 square feet. So that's the second tenant. The third tenant is 2,000 square feet, roughly, it's a little less, and we don't have anybody for that yet. Okay, so that's that. We talked about the apartments. These apartments are very small. They're roughly about 650 square feet to 675. The biggest one, I think, is 875. Okay, so generally speaking, they're more like, 3 of them are like enlarged studios. That's kind of what they are, except we have a door for a bedroom, so it's classified as a 1 bedroom. There's been incredible demand for the apartments. If we wanted to have a waiting list, we probably could. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's been it's been very interesting to try to basically lease space that's on the backside of a building on the post road. There is clearly interest. There is very little available retail in town, and there won't be for quite some time. David's on the phone, and he's on the screen, and he can tell you his project's a couple of years away. It's going to be gorgeous, but you're going to have one side of the street kind of partially operating, and you've got this other side of the street that's basically, you know, not working so well either. We've seen Brooks Brothers leave. We've got the rise of e-commerce. The notion to think that retail is going to be what it is in the future is nonsense. Brick and mortar is a problem, okay? I think every retailer, including our sports shop, which I frequent and I'm a big fan of, okay, is still going to face all the problems everybody else is facing. So to basically say, okay, we're going to shut the pack of this building down because, you know, there's not enough parking, and there's 650 parking places available by the town, and presumably 150 of them are available. It's just kind of nonsense. And it's really insulting to the people that are here that are willing to invest in the town, and you all are basically saying, well, you know, there is no good use of this property other than what it was. That's just silly.
John, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're gonna go back to the beginning of this, batting order, is what I call it. I'm just trying to keep it to parking right now. And you gave us a great overview, and I don't disagree with you. No one's advocating that the thing's gonna stay vacant. It's just.
Yeah,
Okay.
no.
No one ever said that.
And
But Larry, I want you to finish your thoughts.
and I think I just want to go back to Sherrod a moment, and I didn't get my notes in here, but Sherrod, you mentioned this is your first time doing a project for Darien, I believe.
Yes.
And that a lot of the analysis and the numbers you're coming up with are based on national averages. And I look at this parking lot, and it seems to me to be it's a unique shape. I don't know how many other places in the nation are parking lots shared by 3 such entirely different types of companies and things of that nature. One was built for a bank originally, and it's different now. But I mean, can you just confirm for me? Are your estimates here based on national averages of certain behaviors and less so of an analysis of Darien itself? Because I think that's what I heard you say.
Right. This is Sharad Kaluri again from CDM Smith. So the averages that we got for the seasonal variation is from a national standard handbook that we use. We don't have any data here for the other months of the year. So we kind of base it on looking at when the counts were done and then use those national guidance to say, typically for retail type of, sorry.
I appreciate it. That really answers my question. Because it seems to me I'm going to put a lot more weight on the experiences of the businesses that use the lot currently. And we're talking about a playhouse that, and just to confirm what Jim was saying, their actual need for parking now is going to be lower than it was before. And I believe when the movie theater went in, our predecessors were probably trying to figure out how many horse rails could go in there or something like that. But
that was 1954.
Okay.
It was.
But I mean, I don't. I guess in my evaluation, I'm not going to. I don't know how much weight I can give something that's used on national averages when our behavior here is, I think, kind of unique. And just to confirm, the usage that they're going to have ongoing is less than what they need currently. That's correct, right? Maybe Amy, you can answer that for me, or just confirm that for me again. That the usage going forward is less than the need currently assuming it was still a movie theater.
Yes, absolutely. The movie theater was approximately 100 parkers was what they were expecting.
Pretty sure I heard you say that. I just wanted to confirm that I heard that. So, I mean, those are my questions. Those are my comments and thoughts.
Okay.
Right now.
I want to do this, Amy. This is what I would like to do. It's approaching 10 o'clock. What I would like to do, and I want to make a couple comments first, is go back to the beginning and speak to the architect, have him ask any questions, and that's James and his father. Hopefully they're still here. Then we have the site plan, which was done by Land Tech, and that's Earl. I think he's still here. We can now, the commissioners ask questions of those two people in subsequent orders, and then we can swing back to this. Relative to parking, and then I'm going to stop and switch over. I just want you to think about two things. One is, in our files, we have the shared parking agreement, which is a deed from 1954. We have the 1978 shared parking agreement when this whole thing started. It was amended in 1984. I did not see in the file the current one that was done, I'm going to say, in 2000 or 1990. That's on file in the land records. I don't know if that was in the file and I missed it, or we don't have it.
You have the most current parking agreement. I'm not sure what.
The last one I have is from 1984, and that's between Webster Bank and the Zangrillos.
Correct. That's it.
Isn't there another one that when Collins bought the property?
No.
And it's three-way? No?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I'm gonna check on that after we can.
And Steve, just
Yes.
Steve, quick question. Can when Cafe Nero went in and they did their parking, I just don't, can I get a copy of that so that I remember what that looked like?
Sure. I think to help us out a little bit, and I think I would say pad the record a little bit. I want to put it to the record that the 2015 Nelson Nygaard study, which was referenced in a lot of this stuff. And for the record, Jim Rand mentioned it earlier. Since I've been on the commission in this particular lot, we've looked at the lot for Interlight when that went in, and when that went in and replaced the place where my daughter used to buy Sugar Lips, some little clothing space. We also
Wish list.
Wish list.
Wish list.
They used to buy Sugar Lips, remember? We also looked at this lot when Cafe Nero came in, and that was approved. We also looked at this lot when the yoga studio, the yoga studio went in. I forget what the name of that place is. I've never been there.
CST 50, are you talking about?
Yes.
The
Yes.
Pilates? Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Jeremy to look at the records and see if there's anything special relative to parking or experts in those things.
I agree with you. We should put those into the record. Just to summarize, I have gone through all of the prior approvals, and there were parking studies done sort of earlier on, but for the most part, people have kind of built upon the parking studies that were in the file from previous applications, most of which have been done by Malone McBroom, which is why I referenced that when I introduced them.
Thank you. Okay. And you were also with the attorney that I think represented the Dulcetti group when they put in Paris Cafe, and there was a big parking analysis for that one too.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to hold off on my other questions with regards to parking and move back to the beginning. Amy, the architect, James, is he still here?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yep.
With regard to the architects, just for the record, Amy mentioned it, but the exterior of the building, design, the exterior was approved by the Architecture Review Board on January 29th, 2020. That letter's in the file.
Yes.
We looked at this on February 7th after the Architecture Review Board looked at it. So let's ask if any commissioners have any other questions of this expert or the professional that designed the building. Jennifer Leahy, do you have any questions about the architecture? Okay, moving on. Laura,
No question.
okay, Jim Rand?
No.
Okay, and Kara Gately left the room. So if Jennifer has any questions, she can ping me or do something in the chat.
All over.
What's that? I don't see here.
Jennifer left, we don't have quorum.
That's correct. Kara did leave the room.
Okay. Is
We do
Jennifer
have
still in the room, Fred?
Yes, Jennifer is in the room. We do have a quorum.
Okay, great. Okay, do I have any questions on architecture? I don't think I do. Where am I? Maybe I'll put your plans. Got it. Okay. Nope, I'm good on architecture. Okay, I think we're fine. Great view. Good. So that expert's is off the hook. Okay. The next we have Earl, who did the site plan from Land Tech.
I'm here.
Earl, I'm not sure. I think Earl's with Land Tech, correct, Amy?
Amy.
No, I'm actually with Blades and Govern, but we're working through Land Tech. But I'm a landscape architect with Blades and Govern, landscape
Okay.
architects in Fairfield.
Amy, who's the person from Land Tech that did the design?
Well, Peter Romano is on as well. Earl did the presentation. Earl was working with Land Tech on
Okay.
on the site plan.
Got it.
But Peter is on the phone as well. I think he can jump in if you have any questions that Earl's not able to answer.
Okay, I've got a couple minor questions, and then maybe some thoughts. With regards to, I'm on page C1 of the Land Tech documents. I see the pergola that's on there. There was another document that was recently submitted. I think it was submitted yesterday, where that's where the sidewalk, you go from that one island where the dumpster was, and there's a connection that's going across Grove Street to the other side of the street. All right. What my goal in life, I added to the file that the 2015, I mean, the 1951 parking study or downtown study, which shows the plan. It's a parking plan for off-site parking downtown, and I also added in the downtown potential redevelopment elements from the 2006 plan conservation development. What I'm driving at relative to land, to the site plan, is this connectivity, I would call it, that goes from 2 Squab Lane all the way to the sports shop. Okay? So I know you put in some lighting. In terms of the lighting, does that follow this path that you designed? And does it get me from the beginning of Grove Street, where the back of Bankwell is, to, I guess, the entrances of the front doors to the apartments?
So this is Earl, Earl Govan, landscape architect from Blades and Govan in Fairfield. The new lighting is situated around the new pavement, the lighter, the darker red on the plan, and takes you from the right side of the plan through the site to the left side around the building. So there's new lighting around the building. There's also new lighting in the parking lot. A couple of new fixtures in the parking lot. But I'm not quite sure what you're referring to in terms of a new route to the sports shop. I'm not quite sure what you refer to as the route to the sports shop. We're concentrating on the route on the lighting around the back of the building.
Thank you. So what the plan, the town plan of conservation development from 2016, and the document that was added from 1951. What that's trying to do is connect downtown. And if you look at the plan, from 2006, it talks about parallel streets. So what I'm trying to do is have a road that's parallel to the post road, which connects all of there. So my question is, with regards to the parking, you see where on the document that's there, see the 2 trees that are there? Go a little higher. Yep. No, the ones that are right on the corner here. Go to the left.
Here.
What I'm trying to, no, that's to the right. That's all right, Amy. Where you pick up the tickets for the movie theater today.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is see if you can extend maybe that sidewalk or that paver to the other tree, and get you closer to the Webster Bank. Right, so I can go from, yes, keep going. You were just doing it. Go from not down to where you pick up the tickets. I'm trying
straight out from in front of the
my cursor I can't see right now for some reason, so I can't see what I'm pointing at even.
Okay, that's fine.
Right there.
Right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Right there.
Connect those trees. Right. So that's what I'm trying to do is get people to go from all the way down Grove Street onto your property, past your new your new 3 retail stores, and then keep going towards the sports shop.
I mean,
Okay, so I can respond to that
Okay?
okay.
by saying we currently have landscaping in those islands. Could we replace those with brick and walkways? Yes,
Okay.
no doubt.
That,
But there is currently landscape to try to soften that parking lot a little bit.
great. I would like you to think about that, if you could, because this parking lot that we're talking about, that we beat to death for a little while, serves all 3 buildings plus a little bit of the Kennedy hair store. And I'd like to get people to be able to walk between the buildings and make it walkable.
Gotcha.
That's my main real question, and I think you connected the paver at the beginning where the dumpster was, and I think you put something in across Grove Street to I want to say the north side of Grove Street, where Mr. Delcetti has a piece of property. Was on yesterday's plan?
That's correct.
That's on the plan. Should be on the screen right now.
Okay, I see it there. It's like yellowish.
Yeah, it's covered over with a little green, but there is a connection to the existing sidewalk on the north side of Grove.
Okay, so that's that.
Make it a little easier.
And
on this.
that's a better view.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay,
And that's going to match. That will match. Is it Brook Street around the corner?
Oh yeah, Brook. Mm-hmm.
That's going to match that same granite curb or granite pavement, granite flush curb with a paver inside it. That's vehicle rated,
fantastic.
so you can
So
drive.
he's talking about the crosswalk currently between Uncle's and the Sugar Bowl.
Yes, I got you. So
Yeah,
now,
the post road, the next block up.
So now, if I'm leaving, the melting pot, I can walk on a nice sidewalk all the way to the old ticket window at the movie theater on nice brick pavers.
That's correct.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay. Larry Warble, do you have any questions with regards to the site plan for either Neil or Peter Romano?
No, I don't.
Okay. Jim Rand, any questions for these 2 professionals?
No question, thank you.
Okay. Jennifer, are you back? Do you have any questions for these 2 professionals?
I've always been here. No, I'm all good.
Fantastic. Jen, did you have any questions with regards to the architecture?
No, you asked me already.
Okay, got it. Just checking. All right. So, Amy, these 2 guys are off the hook.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So that gets rid of architecture. That gets rid of land tech.
I just had a question for Earl.
I'm sorry. Yes, I did not let Jeremy or Fred ask any other questions. Go ahead, sir.
Earl,
Sir.
it looked tonight like there were some trees in that existing parking lot that might not be thriving. I think the plan shows you're getting rid of one or both of them?
There is one, I believe it's one large tree in the island where we now have 2 trees.
Yes.
Right in the middle. There's one big tree there that is in sorry shape. So our plant, and it's mounded up very high.
Yes.
It's not a very good growing condition. So our plan was to remove that, change the island slightly, and put 2 trees back in, and a light pole, I believe we have in there as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Fred, just to circle back, do you have any questions with regards to the site plan or the with this stuff?
I do not at the moment.
Okay. All right. I think we're good with this. All right. Now we're back to parking and whatnot. I do just want to add, and Amy already brought up a little bit, but we did get letters of support on the application from the Delcettis, which I don't know if Amy mentioned that earlier. Delcettis own the building that's all the way at the end of Grove Street, which is called Paris Cafe. They also own the building directly across the street from this property where that new crosswalk is going to be going across Brook Street. And then we got a letter in the file from Rizzo Hutson, who's a former commissioner, Reese's family also owns a piece of property on Grove Street, which is the Darien Rate Bank. And we got one from Gina Zangrillo. And then now we're up to Fred Conzi's question. This is something where, relative to parking, we're going to move back to that for a second. Someone's got to help me out with this. I saw a little bit of a conflict with regards to the use of the 35 Leroy. John and Amy sent in an email correspondence saying that Dr. Adley spoke to John, the people at the Playhouse, the employees of the Playhouse building in and of itself can use the 35 Leroy during November and December, I think is what it says. And it's subsequent to a follow-up agreement.
Right.
We also got an email chain from Fred Conzi and Gina. Fred Conzi, just for the record, works for the Zangrillo family, so to speak, as a consultant. The sports shop also has rights or an agreement with the 35 Leroy, I guess with the prior superintendent. The email from Mr. Conzi says it's basically 365 days a year. And it talks about both the front parking spaces and the back parking spaces, which I think add up to 87 parking spaces? Somewhere around 75, 80. So, Amy, are you aware of this at all?
Yes, we're aware of the agreement that the sports shop has, and we're hoping ultimately the agreement we'll enter into with the Board of Ed will mirror the sports shop agreement. I'm going to be frank with you. I am shocked that Dr. Adley responded to me at all under the current environment. We've been actually reaching out to him for a while, and he's been understandably very busy with other matters. And so we didn't really get into the fine tune anything with him as far as the agreement, but he did say that he'd be happy to have, as long as there is indemnification, to allow his parking lot to be used when it's not otherwise being used by Board of Ed members. Okay. So as far as what that exact agreement will look like, we need to have some further conversations with Dr. Adley and potentially the Board of Ed.
Okay, I'm not super concerned about this document itself because that's a private agreement, so we have to worry about that. My only concern is that Fred's email chain representing from Gina and says that they have rights on all 75 spaces 365 days a year, and now you get rights to those same spaces for 2 months out of the year. That's why there's a conflict. I know you're in... Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, the sports shop doesn't have exclusive rights to any of those spaces. Their agreement is that they are allowed to use it as overflow, which would be compatible with other users of this shared parking lot using the Board of Ed lot for overflow for employees.
Okay. As long as I mean, plus you also have a shared parking agreement with Zangrillo's and Webster Bank. So
correct.
I just want to make sure that there's no two conflicting documents.
No, there won't be any conflicting documents. And in fact, I should also say that the Zangrillos were the ones that had discussed the fact that they have that agreement with the Board of Ed and shared and have no problem with us approaching the Board of Ed for a similar agreement. And that was where that conversation came from to begin with.
Fantastic. Okay. Then where are we? Okay.
Steve, Jim Rand, can I just a brief
Go right ahead.
mention Amy? Going back to your conversation with Steve about
Which Amy?
My watch is
Nice. Hey Siri.
I don't know how to shut it off. The latest copy of the shared agreement, parking agreement, that's in my package at least, is between Zangrillo and the bank. It does not include the theater call.
Right.
There's the recorded documents, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the 80s, interestingly about this agreement, there isn't one agreement between all three parties. There are agreements between each of the parties has agreements with one another, so it forms a circle, but there is not one all-encompassing agreement.
Well, be that as it may, I think we might be a little bit more comfortable on this whole parking issue if we could see the agreement to which the theater is, if that's
immediate.
that could be available.
That's immediately before the document that you're looking at in the application. There's a 19. Let's see.
I have it, Amy. It's 1978.
Okay.
It's dated February.
Right.
February.
I'll check with Fred or Jeremy.
Yeah, we have a 1978 agreement between Mr. Zangrillo and United Artists Theater. And
Yeah,
then
got that.
That was recorded on the land records. And then we have a 1984 agreement between the president of it's Connecticut Bank and Trust and the Darien Sport Shop, which is also
Yeah, got that.
Those are true agreements. And then we also have a deed from 1954, which is Prudential Theaters. So
Right, that's the original agreement.
okay, so Amy, to your knowledge and whatnot, there's no other agreements past this thing from 1984. I'm sorry.
Correct.
Okay.
But there is an agreement that involves the theater.
There is
Right, but that's the 78 agreement.
It's 1978. It's
I didn't
between.
see the theater mentioned, but
It's
I'll look again. Sorry.
The looks like the agreement was put together by United Artists.
I can't speak to that. I was
I'm
not
staring
that
at
old. 1978.
You're trying to tell me you weren't born? Jeez.
No, I didn't say that. I was born.
So was I know Jim Rand was.
Hey, be civil.
Try it. All right. You have it. If you don't have it, we'll get it to you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. All right. Now, where are we? With regards to parking. With regards to the parking document, we have a series of studies or a series of reports that went back and forth. We have the letters. So I think at the end of the day, we're just looking for some conclusions on where we are. Amy, do you mind if I put it on you to try to summarize this issue again? Because it's kind of sort of the last thing on the table, if you ask me.
I mean, I'm happy to, and of course, we do still have the experts on the line who can seek any specific questions. But I think basically there is agreement between these two experts that during certain times of year, on certain days of the week, there is going to be the projected demand is higher than the available spaces in this lot and approaching the available spaces. So if you're trying to say that you don't ever want 100% full lot, you know, we've got overcapacity problems on not just, you know, once a year. It's not going to be totally infrequent. That said, you know, those are based on projections, and those are there. We're talking about a shared parking agreement that has existed, as we sort of started talking about, since 1954. This change from a movie theater to these retail establishments and a few residential apartments isn't the thing that's causing the overparking situation in this lot. Now, if we want to talk to a broader issue about parking in downtown Darien, by all means, I think that it is a good idea for the town to take a look at that, and for the commercial property owners to get together with the town to discuss what what makes sense on a going forward basis. But if we're looking at this application, which is what we should be looking at right now, we're looking at trying to utilize this space in the least additionally impactful way. And I think that, John went through who the expected tenants are for this space, what this expected retail space is going to look like. And I think that, again, you're trying to look at a broader picture in connection with a relatively, I'm not going to call it minor, but certainly not a major application. This is not a major change to downtown Darien. It is an improvement to downtown Darien and Grove Street, but it's not a major change.
Great, so we're talking 4,000 square feet, 5,000 feet.
Right, we're talking about a almost 6,000 square foot theater and turning it into about 4,000 square feet of retail.
Correct. Okay. Bologna Rick Broom. Who's that? That's Neil. Right. In the final analysis, do we have enough parking according to your study?
Again, this is Neil. According to our study, the Playhouse lot is currently approaching capacity on the middle of the day on Fridays, and we're going to be adding around 15 new cars, and it might tip over, and some of those folks can't fit in the Playhouse lot, are going to use public parking like the Grove Street lot or whatever on-street parking they can find.
Right.
That's our finding.
Okay. And remember, commissioners, our goal, as per town plan and everything, is to try to make downtown walkable. Right? We don't own these lots. We can't do a whole lot about it, but, we're trying to make the lots, the town walkable. So that's your final analysis. And with regards to Maloney, with regards to Shad, you've worked a lot in Westport, you said? Sherrod? You're muted. There you go.
Yes.
You worked
yes,
a
this
lot.
is Sherrod again. Yes, I'll work a lot with Westford. I do the planning and zoning reviews for the town, as part of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Right. They've got shared parking and municipal parking all over the place. I drop my kids off in Westport a lot.
Yeah.
Do you think we have better parking in Darien as compared to Westport, or vice versa?
I think what I see different, and this is just my opinion. I'm not kind of.
That's why we hired you, man. We hired you for your
opinion. You got a lot of density here. Is certainly there compared to some of the places in Westport, which are kind of more spread out. I know the Westport, like the town center, is quite dense in terms of Main Street and others, but this is quite a dense urban setting in Darien along Route 1. So I kind of want to go back to what Commissioner Warble was saying. I mean, when I said this is my first time, I meant this is my first time into the commission. I did work for Westcog. We did the Route 1 corridor study on Darien way back several years ago. We are sub-consultant to Clough Harbor Associates, so I'm kind of pretty familiar with Route 1 and surrounding area. So I definitely, have not been involved in any kind of parking role for the commission in the past. So this is kind of my first take at it, and that's kind of wanted to mention that in my opening. So I just want to clarify that.
I do a lot of stuff in Westport on Main Street. 48 Westport, the building behind it's the old YMCA. And David Wallman's moved parking lots and buildings all over the place. And all their parking in Westport is shared parking. That's why I just pressed your feet on that one. I think the commissioner talked about it. I'd like to see if I can open it up to the public if we have no more real questions. If there's anybody in the public would like to speak to anything relative to this application, please.
Yeah, Steve.
That sounds like David Genovese.
David Genovese here. So,
sir.
Listen, I'll begin by saying that, John Vaccaro is a friend, and I believe that he has done a great job with his developments to date in Darien. I think the project in Norotan came out great, and the Orange Theory Pasta Vita building is looking great, and he's done some great things, and I think he'll do great things. He and Joe will do great things with the Playhouse building. So I want to be clear, because I'm going to raise a bunch of issues with you, but I want to be clear that I'd like you to find a way to approve this, because I think that the improvements that he and his team have come up with are great improvements and are consistent with the town plan of conservation and development, and will improve kind of what I would call like the 360-degree character of some of the buildings in downtown. We've got much better walkability around Grove Street Plaza now, and I work downtown in the midst of all this, so I watch it every day, for better or for worse. And I think that what they're proposing is good. I think the possibility of these tenants, these particular tenants that he's thinking about, these lower volume tenants, is important to consider. But one thing, or a few things that I want to raise, I think that you are fundamentally missing the point in proper analysis of a situation like this, with all due respect. I think that Commissioner Rand makes a good point that it's a private parking agreement, and so long as the private parties to that agreement are comfortable, why would we care? I understand that, laissez-faire point of view, and I share it for the most part, or I shared it until I started working in downtown Darien. What that view doesn't recognize is that when you overburden the lots or a private lot, what happens necessarily is, as the experts pointed out, people get pushed, customers of these businesses get pushed out into neighboring property lots, and there are not sufficient parking spaces in the municipal lots to handle the overflow parking. If you read the Nelson Nygaard report from 2015, what it talks about, and Jeremy could probably express a more clear view of this, but what it talks about is the fact that by 2015, the municipal parking lots in downtown Darien had become pretty full. They basically reached full occupancy. And I would compare and contrast that situation to what we found when we started investing in downtown Darien in 2003, when we would literally host the farmers market for Darien in the Center Street parking lot. And that's kind of hard for people to imagine because that lot is so full today. But, 10, 15 years ago, that lot actually was empty and you could have the farmers market there. So I just wanted to make that point, because what's happened as a result of some of the changes that have occurred with this building over time, since it was originally approved when it was redeveloped by Arthur Collins and Tom Golden, is a very, very significant change in the parking demand generated by the tenants. So I'm going to step back for just a minute and give you a quick perspective on history, because I think it's important. The first shared parking agreements that I'm aware of in Darien related to this project, this property with the sport shop, and also the Darien Dinner Theater with 17 Old Kings Highway and 9 Old Kings Highway South, both with which we own 17 Old Kings Highway South. The Darien Dinner Theater shared parking agreement, that's a perfect example of shared parking, because the dinner theater was only open at night and the office buildings were open in the day. So you had complementary demand and everything kind of worked. That dinner theater closed and became a church. So now that happens on a day, not in the evening. It happens basically on Sundays when the office buildings are also closed. So that parking agreement basically works just fine. And here you have a shared parking agreement that was really predicated upon the idea that the movie theater occupied almost all of the building, most of the building. I think there was like a small yogurt shop in there when I was a kid. And then the sports shop. And the movie theater was, for the most part, only open at night. So one of the points that I find kind of inappropriate that Attorney Zavatakis keeps making is that you're reducing the demand from this change from a movie theater to 3 low-volume retail spaces and a few apartments. What her comments fail to make, and I don't think anybody has made the point tonight, is that movie theater demand is happening at night. It's not happening in the daytime. And so while this is a small change, and I agree, 4,000 feet of retail here or there isn't going to make a massive difference in kind of what happens in downtown from today. I think what your commission has been doing over time, I think you've been making decisions incrementally and looking at things on the margin. And with these incremental decisions, you've created you've worsened a problem that you didn't intend to worsen. So let me just go back for a sec. When this building was redeveloped by Golden and Collins, it was proposed to be an Ann Taylor loft, which did very little business. It was an Elizabeth Arden spa, which did not a lot of business, which is why they failed. It did. It had a Verizon store and a very, very high-end linen store. And those were the tenants, the initial tenants in the Playhouse building. Incrementally, those tenants failed and went out, and new tenants came in that are significantly different in terms of the parking demand that they generate. So Elizabeth Arden failed, and Posh Spa opened up and cut their prices by probably 50% compared to what you had to pay for the same service at Elizabeth Arden. Posh Spa, if you go up there, probably has 50, 60 people at a time in the 10 or whatever thousand square feet it is. Ann Taylor Loft, which had very little business, failed, and Senna Restaurant opened up with, I mean, you can tell me I don't know the details. Maybe, Attorney Zavatakis or John or Joe know, probably 80, 90 tables in a bar. And the one that really, the straw that broke the camel's back, in my opinion, and started to cause problems for us with neighboring properties was Cafe Nero, which was basically the Verizon store, and before that, the linen store. If you go into Cafe Nero, I mean, maybe in the post-COVID era for a little while, it's going to be a little different, but there's no less than 30 or 40 people in there at a time in 2,000 feet or 2,500 feet. So you've made these incremental decisions, and you haven't really considered the whole. So, Fred, can you give me control of the, can I share the screen?
Yes, I can hand it over to you.
Something I want to show you. I have two documents I want to share with you just to make the point that I think you should, to be clear, I think you should find a way to approve this, but I think that you have to consider a way to kind of navigate and manage the parking demanded by this space over time. So can you see my screen, that Excel spreadsheet?
Sure can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So basically what this is this takes our project across the street. And this is the analysis that we prepared for you. And this is similar to the analysis that we've had to provide for every project we've proposed to you. This is a site plan application, basically with I would propose a fundamental change in the demand of one tenant, going from a basically nighttime only movie theater to retail and apartments. So what we laid out here was the land uses for our project: office, retail, restaurant, residential, the total. What parking the town of Darien would require, and this was a matter of record when we submitted our application to you the first time. So as the parking consultants would agree, I suspect, Darien has extremely conservative, very demanding parking requirements. So basically, our office space, 81,000 feet, would require 325 spaces at 4 per thousand. The retail, 6.7 per thousand, 545 spaces for the 81,000 feet. The restaurant, the residential, and so on. By the Darien zoning regulations, our project would have required over 1,300 spaces. Nelson Nygaard, after doing their analysis for the town, basically said in 2015, as we understood it, and again, Jeremy would have a more educated view here, but Nelson Nygaard basically said the town municipal lots are full. They are at capacity. So the comment that was made earlier that there are 150 available, empty parking spaces at some time, that's just, I live down there. It's never the case. Never. So the Nelson Nygaard study says these lots are approaching capacity, and the town, when we went to visit you in 2015 and 16 and 18 for our approvals, you said to us we could not rely on overflow lots. We had to provide sufficient parking on our property. So using the Nelson Nygaard ratios, which were a little more commercial, more in line with the ITE plans, we would have required a total of 627 parking spaces. And what we said was, look, we live here, we work here, we don't want to make a mess. We don't want it to, we know if it doesn't work, we're going to get blasted. So let's be a little more conservative And we basically built up a different model and said, okay, we're going to be a little more conservative here, a little more aggressive here. In the end, we think we should provide, by the books, about 944 spaces if we didn't have shared parking. And with shared parking, and you know, these experts like Pete Romano, I know, does a lot of work in other parts of the county. Shared parking agreements generally allow, from what I understand, you know, a 25% to a 40% reduction in actual parking required. You know, based on what the numbers would say, you'll say if you have shared uses where there's different ebbing and flowing of parking demand, the restaurants are busy in the morning, the gyms are busy at lunch, the gyms are busy in the morning, it kind of works out, you can do a reduction. So we proposed, and you agreed, we proposed to build 810 parking spaces, almost 200 more than Nelson Nygaard required us, which was a 14.2% reduction. So that's how you approached our project. And let me see if I have to figure out how to open up this other spreadsheet. If I put this project into the same model, and I basically say, okay, what does the Darien parking require of these different properties and uses? And so I think this points out where the problem exists right now, forgetting about really what's happening. You take the different buildings, and I acknowledge, and I shared this with John earlier yesterday, the Kennedy's building is not in the shared parking agreement, but it's small. So I put it in there just to kind of keep this kind of consistent with all the users in that area. You have 72,000 feet of retail and the 4 apartments. And you by the zoning, you require 395 parking spaces. And I looked at that and I said, and I think John agreed with me, Cafe Nero at 17 spaces and Senna at 30, when that's really moving in the mornings and in the afternoon, there's 2 to 3 times that number of people in Cafe Nero all the time. And Senna at 30 is probably close to right. But we adjusted Cafe Nero and said, okay, let's add 33. And that would give you a total requirement of 428 parking spaces. You have 194 spaces on site. And if you went with a more conservative or more, maybe aggressive ITE parking ratio, which is again more in line with the Nelson Nygaard report that the town has, that would get you to about 354 spaces versus the 194 on site, which is a 45% reduction from what is, you know, what's provided is 45% less than what the professional estimate would suggest you need. So my point, and I'm not a traffic expert, so let me be 100% clear. You know, these guys are the pros, but by focusing on the incremental demand, I think you've kind of missed the fundamental point. And I think that's what's causing consternation among people, because they just know that viscerally something doesn't seem quite right. And when you look at this incremental demand, you're like, it is incremental. It's not a big deal. And I agree. It's not a big deal. We are where we are today. But when you look at the whole picture, it's clear that the demand for parking from these uses on these collective properties is way in excess of what's provided on the site. So that excess demand is going into our properties, the municipal lots, that are basically full, and it's causing a mess. So what I would ask you to consider is, given that, you know, you shouldn't be making decisions based on marginal parking analysis, in my opinion. It leads you to a dangerous place, and it's not fair. But what I think you should do, my own opinion, again, take it for what it's worth or throw it in the garbage can. But I think you should consider how you can basically create an opportunity. And I shared it with John and Gina Zangrillo. You could create an opportunity to create more employee parking, you know, in the vicinity by maybe creating like a partnership with the town and doing a structured parking deck along Leroy Avenue in that lot that would create significant additional parking for employees. The sports shop has over, I talked to Gina today, the sports shop has over 75 employees. You know, the total parking that is required of the sport shop is like 168 by the town parking. There's 195 spaces on the site. The sport shop basically takes up most of that parking most of the time. So these are just the numbers, and this is a consistent approach to looking at the picture based upon how you looked at 1020 Post Road with us and how you looked at 17 Old Kings Highway South, which was subject to a shared parking agreement, and it's how we looked at the Corbin project. And I guess I don't really understand how you could believe that it's logical to look at this based on just the incremental, or maybe you can do that and say, well, we're already in a tough situation, so how much worse is it really going to be? I take the point, and I was disappointed, candidly, that the theater was closing, because I think that a theater is a great asset to the downtown. I do think, though, that I'm a realist, and in light of what's happened lately in COVID-19, I sadly think that most of the theater companies are going to be in so much trouble over the next few years. We can't bank on a theater returning to downtown, and that's a sad thing, but it's reality. So I think John's a great steward and will do a great job with this project, whatever he does with his team. But I wanted to highlight what I think you're really fundamentally missing in your analysis. And I just want to make sure we're being kind of forthright about what the issues are and what the problems are, and where some of these problems are coming from.
Thank you. That was a very nice overview, and I don't think you get a huge argument from any of us. If you remember, in the town planning and conservation development, that was an offshoot, or that came after the Nelson Nygaard report. In that plan, and one of the exhibits that's in there, we have the municipality building additional parking structures in town. That's not something that we're prepared to do today, or from my knowledge, in the near future. But it's something that we put in the 10-year plan in 2016. Going forward, which is not going to get updated until 2015. In your application for Corbin Drive, you pulled out 1951's town plan and conservation development, added Market Street, which we might call Penny Lane, but somebody came up with that plan in 1951. It's going to be done in 2021. I appreciate your time, David. I really do. Thank you.
I don't know if commission members have questions for David or Amy.
Do any commissioners have questions relative to what Mr. Genovese or Amy? Do you have any questions since you're the applicant?
So I just have a comment, because that was what I wanted when I asked for the parking for Cafe Nero in particular, because that's when I really saw the burden on the town. So Dave's spreadsheet was awesome. So if we could have something provided to us, because it's the sum of all parts, and that's my issue. It's the sum of all parts. And I agree with Dave, and I really appreciate his time and effort. And I agree that this project is fantastic, but we have to figure out the sum of all parts to make it work, so that we're not burdening the parking lots and we're causing frustration. And so thank you, Dave.
No, you're welcome. Listen, I think if you look, I take the point that 4,000 feet of additional retail isn't going to make or break the situation. It's already pretty brutal. And it's mostly brutal because of Cafe Nero and Posh. And I suspect, if you go back and look at those applications, I suspect you're going to find the parking analysis was similar to this that you've seen tonight. It was like incremental, it's incremental retail, incremental food service versus the last retail store. And it totally underestimated what was going to happen. And I mean, I joke around, we call Cafe Nero the WeWork of Darien. People go in there and they hang out all day, and then the kids go all afternoon. I think what you should do, I think to subject John and his team to the torture of, a town process where we're going to try to find a place to site a parking lot, I think that's not fair to him. That could take years. And I'm long-term in this, and even though it's really painful for me, because every day my tenants like the Toy Box and Rosie and Helen Ainson are complaining about the fact that all the Cafe Nero customers are parking in their lot. By the way, that's where they are. They're not in your lot. They're on our lot on the post road, walking across the street. So that's why your parking analysis is really not really accurate in any way from a practical point of view. But I think if you can, work your way toward an approval of this, but help the downtown by making a point that we want the town to take seriously the possibility. We talk to retailers from around Fairfield County all the time. Truthfully, most of them would say Darien has a better parking situation than most downtowns, certainly better than Greenwich Avenue. We have improvement we can make, and we're working on that. And I think our project will help with circulation and signage. But I think you guys, as a part of any approval you may come up with here, if you find yourselves doing that, you need to kind of send a message to the town that if people want to have a good experience in the downtown, we also have to invest. And one of the ideas that, I sort of pitched to John and Gina was the idea of collaborating with the town and giving the town the right to put a parking structure on their property along Leroy, which wouldn't impact their commercial use, and do like a tax increment financing, do a financing based on all the incremental tax revenue that our projects are generating. We didn't get any tax abatement to build 800 parking spaces. So there's a lot of tax revenue that's going to come off the back of that if it works the way it should. And with what John's doing here and the price he paid for the Playhouse and the new investment he's going to make, that's all new tax base. I think the town should take some of that money and use it toward debt service to support a parking garage that would take the pressure off and put the employees further away. So I just think people want a better downtown. It's just time to work together to make that happen. But again, not to torture poor John and Joe and make them, have this last for 3 years and they're waiting for the next RTM meeting. That would be a tragedy.
The other thing I do want to add, David, to that, you made a comment on it. I'm also on the OPC Commission, which is headed by our first selectman, Jamie Stevenson. There is a plan being formulated to do better signage for parking downtown. So you mentioned signage where the municipal lots are and how to get to them. That's something that the town's already started working on. And I think that was one of the suggestions you just mentioned. Amy, I'd
Can
like
I
to
ask
see...
you though, guys, do you disagree with my parking analysis? Did you find any flaws in to the experts, the parking experts? I mean, do you agree with what I laid out generally?
That's to Neil. Why don't you go, Neil?
Hi, this is Neil. I think it all gets back, like Mr. Genovese is saying, to the bigger picture that, on the whole, the downtown, you might need to take the next step in terms of managing parking on the whole. Be that, expanding supply, putting in a deck somewhere, managing parking demand somehow, pricing, who knows. But I want to also bring it back to the fact that our little land use change in front of you is really, a pretty small drop in the bucket. So, we're working with that as well. We're kind of in a bigger picture, but we're a small component of that.
No, I agree with your point. It's just that, when we make decisions incrementally and we don't step back every once in a while and look at the whole, we end up leading ourselves to a dangerous place. And, this commission, not comprised of this group, but prior groups, approved projects where employees are supposed to park in the Mechanic Street lot. The Darien Rowayton Bank people are supposed to park in the Mechanic Street lot. Well, guess what? No one is doing that. They're parking in the Playhouse lot. And now the new sweeper is sweeping them up. And they're going to my lot. That's what's happening. So, again, I understand that, it's how things sometimes happen. But I think this is a perfect example of the consequences of incremental analysis and incremental decision making and not thinking about the whole every once in a while.
If I can just speak, I appreciate Dave Genovese's points, but I think I do want to go back to what Neil said, that this application, while I think that the points are well made and the conversation needs to continue, and I think I said that already, there needs to be a conversation among the commercial property owners, and I know that the Vacaros are prepared to be and want to be a part of that conversation, and it should include the town. But I don't think that this hearing at, approaching 11 o'clock at night is the best time for that type of conversation to take place.
Agreed. Is there anybody else in the audience, in the public domain that would like to speak to this application?
I would like to just say one or two words.
Go ahead, Mr.
David,
Vaccaro.
that was very well said. John Vaccaro. David, I think that was very well said, and you're far more eloquent than I am. But
Please.
there is
Flattery will get you nowhere.
there is sort of a pattern that sort of brewed over time, and now we're sort of caught with that which is brewed. The one thing that I did want to just point out, I know that there's been a lot of talk about Cafe Nero, and they came on the scene about a year and a half ago, and they become a very, very local sort of hangout. And, our lifeline in the town is the Post Road, and it's not even the entire Post Road, but the main, focus is just, I would say, from I-95 to essentially the train station. And, there's plenty of establishments beyond that at different points on the Post Road. But they, in a very short period of time, I've never really seen this before, they became a very local place, very similar to Sugar Bowl or 1020 or some of the other businesses that are up and down the street. And one of the things that we're trying to encourage, and we're seeing it, is the 40-year-old moving to town, like some people have done over the years, and it's kind of happening again. And that's kind of a social congregating place, right? There's not that many social gathering places in town. We're losing the movie theater. That was, kind of the local, sort of social, movie night sort of place in town as well. And one of the things that we've talked to as high as the CEO of the company, says, is this really your business model where people come in and have a cup of coffee and stay here for 2 hours? And they are well aware of it. They're trying to figure out how to deal with it, but they do have this problem worldwide, and they have quite a few of them worldwide. But what we don't want is for people to think that they're not welcome, because, they invested a lot of money in that location, and they've been pretty successful. So if you take them off the main street and say they don't exist anymore, somebody's got to replace them with something that's similar. And we're lucky to have them. And again, I'm speaking I didn't sign them up as a tenant, but they're pretty nice to have in town. So, and I know they take a lot of parking. So we keep talking to them. We've talked to their area reps. We've talked to their CEO, as I mentioned before, and we'll continue to work on that. But, there's no simple solution to get them to sort of change their sort of business model. So,
just along those lines, you remember Paris Cafe is supposed to come in town. I think they're going to be a direct competitor to Cafe Nero, and they're at the other end of the street. I'm sure there's going to be a coffee shop or two inside the corporate district. I hope there is. So you may
just a donut shop. No coffee, just donuts.
And a bagel shop.
Donuts and back.
So I wouldn't put all the burden on yourself. Competition. If there's a lot of coffee being sold, there's a lot of coffee being sold. That's a good thing. We want people in our downtown. Don't get me wrong. You want people going to the baker and the fish store and the sports shop and every other 10:20 at night and all those places. That's what we want. I've said it a million times. You do not build parking for Black Friday. So hopefully we're successful, and I appreciate all you guys have done. I don't know if we have any other questions.
Yeah, I guess that's going to be a question for the commission, for Amy, and her team who's made the presentation. The question for the commission is if there's other things you want for the record or want to review. If there's anything Amy's team wants to submit, we'll have to make a decision on what else, if anything, comes into the record, and whether we close the hearing tonight or continue it to allow the commission to ask questions about that extra material that comes into the record.
The only thing that I'd like to be in the record, it's up to you, Amy, because in my personal opinion, I would like to close the hearing tonight because I think we beat this thing to death. Is the Nelson Nygaard 2015 study. I have that on my dresser at home. It was referenced in Neil Alinsky's report from Malone McRoom, but I don't want to not close the hearing because we're looking for that document.
I think because that is a town document in the town's records, it can be added to the file of this application, even though the application is closed. It's something that you guys, the same way that some of the prior approvals can be, you can take notice of them without them, but have them submitted into the record and considered in your deliberations because they're part of the public record that's already in your files, just not in this particular file.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'm answering that you can close the hearing tonight and still add that document to the file, and I would be okay with that because it was referenced and considered part of this application.
Thank you. Commissioners, Jim Rand, any closing thoughts at this point if we are closing?
No, I have some thoughts during deliberations, but nothing. I have no further questions.
Larry Warble, any closing thoughts? You're on mute, Larry. Here you go.
No other questions right now. Thank you.
Jennifer Leahy.
No other questions.
I guess the question is, which specific...
Speak up.
Jeremy Ginsburg, Planning and Zoning Director, I guess the commission members have to help me out in which specific other approvals would you be interested in looking at and making part of this record, just so it's clear
Sure.
we're all working off the same documents.
Sure. So why don't we Cafe Nero and Posh? I think because those are the most significant, unless we should add in CST 50. Actually, just add that in as well.
Okay.
When was Posh done?
Amy,
I don't think there is.
Amy, if I recall, this is Jeremy Ginsburg again. I think it was Arden was the original upstairs tenant, and there was an approval for Arden. And then when you and I looked through the records, we didn't see anything for Posh because it was the exact same use, so there was no subsequent approval. Is my recollection correct?
There was some documentation in the record explaining what the use was, and then an administrative decision that yes, it was the same use as what had already been approved. So I think if you're looking for the spa quote unquote approval, you'll need to look at the Elizabeth Arden approval.
Okay, we'll
Wow.
get that for the
Okay.
record.
So I guess we'll look at that just to see it because those numbers are obviously not going to be the same. Elizabeth Arden prices and Posh prices are not the same. But yes, I want to see that.
Sure.
Please, thank you.
So what I'm hearing is the Cafe Nero one, the CST, that's the name of that?
CST 50.
CST 50. And then the Arden approval.
Yep.
The Nelson Nygaard's in by reference. Is there anything else anybody else would like to review prior to deliberations?
Steve, this is Fred Donite. I would just add that there was some discussion with respect to changes to the site plan. I don't know if that's something that the commission wants to consider at this point or, move forward. But if you were looking for additional information from the applicant at this point, that might be something that you want to consider.
Changes to the setback on my suggestions, or?
Yeah, as far as, for example, extending the walk across the, towards the sports shop.
Yeah, I think it's something for them to think about. If they want to change the site plan in a subsequent submission, they'd be okay. They did connect across the street. We have that in the file that they're going to do. I don't want to hold it up so that they have to put in that sidewalk to nowhere towards the sports shop, and the sports shop doesn't even know about it.
Yep.
And it can always be a condition of approval if need be. Correct. If that's where the commission wants to go with this.
Okay, that's fine.
And should we add Paris Cafe, even though it's just to see what they had? I don't remember what their overflow is like.
Amy, do you remember that one? How much parking study did we do for that application? You were the attorney. Do you remember?
I'm sorry, I can't remember the parking study, but that one was more relying on the prior approved restaurant approvals that were in for that lot. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's all the way at the other end of the street, so I'm just not sure. I would encourage including it in this application, but it was.
I'd like to.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. It's part of your record,
So
but
we'll
I don't
include that as
recall what the parking study was that was done with that one. I think it may have relied upon a parking study that was done when the application was for a restaurant a very long time ago.
Oh, you may-
That's had a
yeah,
few,
yeah,
that lot's had a number of different approvals and hasn't been developed yet.
That's fine. Okay, thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. Jennifer, any closing thoughts? You good?
Nope. Thanks.
Does Amy or Mr. Vaccaro want to add anything before we? I think we're going to entertain a motion to close this hearing tonight. It sounds like.
Yeah, we're in agreement with the commission closing the hearing if they're prepared to do so.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to close the hearing. Jim Rand made the motion. Can I get a second from Jennifer?
Yes, I'll second that. Motion to close.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing is
5-0.
closed. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Now we're
Thank you,
on.
everybody.
Now we're on to the bottom of the agenda, which is other business. Requires 2/3 votes for the commission. I vote no other business.
Just adjourn due to the hour.
Yeah, it's 10 to 11 or 5 to 11.
4.
So then after that we have motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
That's a Jennifer.
I second.
Second from Larry. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye.
Adjourned.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.